Chapter 1. The Pace. Young Carmody awoke to the realization of another day. The sun of mid-forenoon cast a golden rhombus on the thick carpet, and through the open windows the autumnal air, stirred by just the suspicion of a breeze, was wafted deliciously cool against his burning cheeks and throbbing temples. He gazed about the familiar confines of the room in puffy-eyed stupidity. There was a burning thirst at his throat, and he moistened his dry lips with a bitter-coated tongue. His mouth was lined with a brown slime of dead liquor, which nauseated him and sent the dull ache to his head in great throbbing waves. Upon a beautifully done mahogany table near the door stood a silver pitcher filled to the brim with clear, cold ice water. It seemed miles away, and, despite the horrible thirst that gnawed at his throat, he lay for many minutes in dull contemplation of its burnished coolness. The sodden condition of his imagination distorted his sense of proportion. The Jaume across the room loomed large in the scheme of things. It was a move of moment, to be undertaken not lightly, but after due and proper deliberation. He threw off the covers and placed a tentative foot upon the floor. A groan escaped him as his right hand brushed the counterpane. Gingerly he brought the member within range of his vision. It was swollen to the wrist and smeared with dried blood, which had oozed from an ugly split in the tight-drawn skin. Slowly he worked the fingers and frowned, more in perplexity than distress, at the sharp pain of the stiffened knuckles. He crossed to the table and, springing the silver catch of a tiny door, cunningly empanelled in the wall, selected from the cellaret a long-necked, cut-glass decanter, from which he poured a liberal drink. The sight of it sickened him, and for an instant he stood contemplating the little beads that rushed upward and ranged themselves in a sparkling semicircle along the curve of the liquor line. "The hair of the dog is good for the bite," he muttered, and with an effort closed his eyes and conveyed the stuff jerkily to his lips. Part of the contents spilled over his fingers and splashed upon the polished tabletop. As the diffused odor reached his nostrils, a wave of nausea swept over him. With a shudder he drained the glass at a gulp and groped blindly for the water pitcher, from which he greedily swallowed great quantities of ice water. He paused before a tall pier glass and surveyed himself through bloodshot eyes. The telephone upon the opposite wall emitted a peremptory ring. Young Carmody turned with a frown of annoyance. He ignored the summons and carefully scrutinized his damaged hand. His brain was rapidly clearing and, from out the tangled maze of dancing girls, popping corks, and hilarious, dress-suited men, loomed large the picture of a policeman. Just how it all happened he could not recollect. He must see the boys and get the straight of it. His mirrored image grinned at the recollection of the officer, the quick, hard-struck blow, and the hysterical screams and laughter of the girls as they were seized in the strong arms of their companions, rushed across the sidewalk, and SM1ing bodily into the waiting taxis. Brrrr. Brrrr. Again the telephone bell cut short his musing. There was a compelling insistency in the sound and, with a muttered imprecation, he jerked the receiver from the hook. "Well," he growled. "Yes, this is William Carmody." "Oh, hello, Governor. I will be right down. I overslept this morning." "Stay where I am." "Why?" "All right, I'll wait." "Now what?" he murmured. "The old gentleman seems peeved." After a cold bath and a vigorous rub he began leisurely to dress. His eyes cleared and he noted with satisfaction that aside from a slight pouchiness, and the faint mottling of red that blotched his cheeks, all traces of the previous night's orgy had disappeared. True, his hand pained him, but he had neatly mended the split with plaster and the swelling had, in a great measure, yielded to the cold water. Getting fat, he grunted, as he noticed the increasing heaviness at his girth. "Fat and soft," he added, as a huge muscle yielded under the grip of his strong fingers. In college this man had pulled the stroke oar of his crew, and on the gridiron had become a halfback of national renown. By the end of his second year no amateur could be found who would willingly face him with the gloves, and upon several occasions, under a carefully guarded sobriquet, he had given a good account of himself against some of the foremost professionals of the squared circle. He was a man of mighty muscles, of red blood, and of iron, to whom the strain and sweat of physical encounter were the breath of life. He wondered as he carefully selected a tie, at the strange request he had received at the telephone. He glanced at the French clock on the mantel. His father, he knew, had been at his desk these 2 hours. They had little in common, these two. After the death of his young wife, years before, Hiram Carmody had surrounded himself with a barrier of imperturbability beyond which even his son never ventured. Cold and unyielding, men called him a 20th-century automaton of big business. Rarely, outside of banking hours, did the two meet. Never but once did they hold extended conversation. It was upon the occasion of the younger man's return from a year's continental travel that his father summoned him and, with an air of impersonal finality, laid out his life work. The time had come for him to settle down to business. In regard to the nature of office business, or any choice he might have in the matter, William was not consulted. As a matter of course, being a Carmody, he was to enter the bank. His official position was that of messenger. His salary, $6 a week, his private allowance, $100. And thus he was dismissed. It cannot be chronicled that young Carmody was either surprised or disappointed at thus being assigned to a career. In truth, up to that time he had thought very little of the future and made no plans. He realized in a vague sort of way that sometime he would engage in business. Therefore, upon receipt of the paternal edict he merely looked bored, shrugged, and with a perfunctory, "Yes, sir," quit the room without comment. He entered upon his duties stoically and without enthusiasm. At the end of a year his salary had increased to $12 a week, and his sphere of usefulness enlarged to embrace the opening and sorting of mail. The monotony of the life palled upon him. He attended to his duties with dogged persistence and in the evenings haunted the gymnasiums. His athletic superiority was soon demonstrated and after a time, neither in the ring nor on the mat could he find an opponent worthy the name. More and more he turned for diversion toward the white lights of Broadway. Here was amusement, excitement, life. He became immensely popular among certain of the faster set and all unconsciously found himself pitted against the most relentless foeman of them all, John Barleycorn. Gradually the personnel of his friends changed. Less and less frequently did he appear at the various social functions of the Avenue, and more did he enter into the spirit of the Great White Way. On every hand he was hailed as Bill Carmody and by the great force of his personality maintained his universal popularity. Many smiled at the rumors of his wild escapades, some even envied, a few frowned. If his father knew he kept his own counsel, it was his way. Only one warned him. Ethel Manton, beautiful, imperious, and altogether desirable, with just the suspicion of a challenge in her daringly flashing eyes, was the one person in all the world that Bill Carmody loved. And loving her, he set her high upon a pedestal and entered the lists with all the ardor of his being. His was the love of desire, the love of a strong man for his mate, bringing out by turns all that was best and worst in him. Yet she remained cold, this girl of his golden dreams. Only at rare intervals did she unbend and allow him a fleeting glimpse of her very soul. At such times her eyes grew tender and she seemed very near to him, and very dear. And then he would tell her of his great love, and always her answer was the same: she would marry no man who was content to live upon an allowance. He must make good, must win to the fore in the business world as he had won in the athletic. And above all he must forswear the pace. In vain he explained that business held no interest for him, that it was no man's game, but a sordid STNLGGLE of wits for the amassing of unneeded gold. In vain he argued that his father, already rich, would, in the event of their marriage, settle a large amount upon them in their own right. In answer to her reference to his habits he would laugh. He was not afraid, there was a man's game. Of course, once married, all that would be changed. But, pshaw, it is all in a lifetime. And then he would lightly promise to mend his ways, a promise that was forgotten within the hour. What do women know of a strong man's play? But one woman did know, and, knowing, cared. Chapter 2. Broadway Bill. William Carmody had scarcely completed his careful grooming when, with a tap at the door, his father entered, closely followed by a rather burly individual in citizen's clothing, whose jaw was correctly and artistically swathed in bandages. The two advanced a few paces into the room and paused. Father and son regarded each other in silence. At length the older man spoke. "Where were you last night?" William flushed at the tone and cast an inquiring glance at the man in bandages, who awkwardly shifted his weight from one foot to the other. His father motioned him to proceed. "I was out with a bunch from Philly. Chesterton, 05, Burke, 03, Little Hammond, 06, and Old Busk Brater, Stargard of the Naughty Noughts." "Drunk, were you?" The words sounded coldly impersonal, and the tone showed no surprise. "Why, no, that is, I wouldn't exactly say," his father silenced him with a gesture. "Did you ever see this man before?" William scrutinized the other carefully. "I'll think not." "Oh, you hain't, eh?" The man's awkwardness disappeared. He advanced a step and it was evident that he spoke with difficulty. "How about last night in front of Shanley's? Guess you wasn't there, eh?" "Guess I just dreamt about a bunch of sousers turkey trotting along the sidewalk. I'd have stood for it, at that, but the girls got to pulling it too raw even for Broadway. I knowed you by sight and staffed in to give you the tip to put the soft pedal on the wiggle stuff, when, Zoe. I guess you didn't reach out and soak me, a cop." He tapped the bandage upon the aggressively advanced jaw. "Maybe the Times building just tangoed across the square and fell on me," he went on with ponderous sarcasm. "And that ain't all. When I gathers myself up, here's the tail lights of a couple of taxis disappearing into 44th Street, and the crowd laughing and joshing me something fierce. I guess I dreamt that, too, eh? And that ain't the worst of it. Down to head Quainers I draws a 30-day space, without. And then, again, I guess they'll shove me right along for promotion on top of this. Not. I tell you I'm in bad all the ways around, with the whole force passing me the grin and asking me have I saw Broadway Bill lately? And in comes the inspector this morning with an order when I came back on, to report to McCluskey, up in Harlem, and help shoo the goats away from eating up the new sidewalks in front of the $5 installment lots. Nice kettle of fish for me, that was in line for a loot. I ale laying it up again you so much for the jolt, you're sure there with the punch, nor for the 30-day space, neither, though with my family I can't afford that none. But, damn it, kid, you've broke me. With this here again me I'll never be a loot in 1,000 years. I'm done." During the recital, the officer's voice lost its belligerent tone. He spoke as man to man, with no hint of self-pity. Young Carmody was honestly sorry. Here was a man who, in the act of giving him a friendly warning, had been felled by a brutal and unexpected blow. A hot blush of shame reddened his cheeks. He was about to speak but was interrupted by the voice of his father. The old man seemed suddenly to have aged. His fine features, always pallid, appeared a shade paler. Gone was the arrogant poise of the head which for 40 years had dominated boards of directors. The square-set shoulders drooped wearily, and in the eyes was the tired, dumb look of a beaten man. "Officer, it seems hardly necessary for me to express my thanks for the consideration you have shown in coming directly to me with this matter," he said at last. "Had you been so inclined you could have stirred up a nasty mess of it, and no one would have blamed you." He stepped to a small table and, seating himself, produced checkbook and pen. "LTNLST, this will reimburse you for any financial loss you may have incurred by reason of this most unfortunate affair," he went on, "and as for the rest, leave that to me. I have, I believe, some little influence at headquarters, and I shall personally call upon the inspector." The officer glanced at the slip of paper which the other thrust into his hand. It was written in 4 figures. He looked up. Something in the old man's attitude, the unspoken pain in the eyes, the pathetic droop of the shoulders, struck a responsive chord in the heart of the officer. Impulsively he extended the hand in which the check remained unfolded. "Here, Mr. Carmody, I can't take your money. You didn't get me right. I start out to knife you for what I can get, and you wind up by treatin' me white. It wasn't your fault, nohow, and I didn't know how you felt about things." There may have been just the shadow of a smile at the corners of Hiram Carmody's mouth as he waved a dismissal. "We will consider the incident closed," he said. At the door the officer turned to the younger man, who had been a silent listener. "It's a pity to waste yourself that way. It's a punk game, kid, take it from me, they don't last. Where's your Broadway bills of 10 years ago? Stop and think, kid. Where are they at? My God," he muttered, as he passed down the broad stairway, "how many old fathers in New York is hiding their feelings behind a bold front, and at the same time eating their hearts out with worry for their boys. And folks calling them good fellows. Money ain't everything in this here world, after all," he added, as his gaze travelled over the paintings and tapestries that lined the great hall. Above stairs an uncomfortable atmosphere of constraint settled upon father and son. Both felt the awkwardness of the situation. Young Carmody was a man with a heart as warm as his ways were wild. His was an impulsive nature which acted upon first impressions. Loving alike a fight or a frolic, he entered into either with a zest that made of them events to be remembered. He glanced across to where his father stood beside the table toying with a jade inkwell, and noted the unwanted droop of the shoulders and the unfamiliar gaze of the grey eyes in which the look of arrogance had dulled almost to softness, a pathetic figure, standing there in his own house, alone, unloved, a stranger to his only son. The boy saw for the first time, not the banker, the dictator of high finance, but the man. Could it be that here was something he had missed? That through the long years since the death of his wife, the sweet-faced mother whom the boy remembered so vividly, this strange, inscrutable old man had craved the companionship of his son, had loved him? At that moment, had the elder man spoken the word, weakened, he would have called it, the course of lives would have been changed. But the moment passed. Hiram Carmody's shoulders squared to their accustomed set, and his eyes hardened as he regarded his son. "Well?" The word rang harsh, with a rising inflection that stung. The younger man made no reply and favoured the speaker with a level stare. "And you a Carmody?" "Yes, I am a Carmody. But, thank God, I am only half Carmody. It is no fault of mine that I bear the Carmody name. At heart I am a McKim." The young man's eyes narrowed, and the words flashed defiantly from his lips. The shaft struck home. It was TNLE. From the boy's babyhood the father had realized it with fear in his heart. The beautiful, dashing girl he had wooed so long ago, had married, and had loved more deeply than she ever knew, was Eiley McKim, descendant of the long line of fighting McKims, whose men-children for 500 years had loomed large in the world wars of nations. Men of red blood and indomitable courage, these, who pursued war for the very love of the game, and who tasted blood in every clim, and under the flag of either nation. Hard riding, hard drinking, hard fighting cavaliers, upon whose deeds and adventures the staid, circumspect Carmodus looked aghast. And this girl-wife, whose soft eyes and gentle nature had won his love, had borne him a son, and by some freak of atavism had transmitted to him the turbulent spirit of the fighting McKims. Again the old man spoke, and his voice was the voice that Wall Street knew, and feared. Suppose you are well pleased with yourself. You are referred to as one of a bunch of sousers. You were pulling it too raw even for Broadway. You are known to fame as Broadway Bill. You are a sport. You, and your college friends. And last night you achieved the crowning success of your career. You soaked a cop. You, the last of a line of men, who for 100 years have dominated the finances of a nation. You, the last of the Carmodus, are Broadway Bill, the sport. The biting scum of his father's tone was not lost upon the younger man, who paled to the lips. Where are the securities you were supposed to have delivered to Strang, Liebart and Company? Here, in my desk. I intended to deliver them on my way to the bank this morning. The boys blew in yesterday and it was up to me to show them around a bit. L will relieve you of the securities. The deal with Strang, Liebart and Company is off. It depended upon the delive 1Y of those bonds during banking hours yesterday. Without a word William crossed to the desk and, withdrawing a packet sealed in a heavy manila envelope, handed it to his father. The bank no longer requires your services, went on the old man coldly. That a Carmody should prove himself absolutely untrustworthy and unreliable is beyond my ken. I do not intend to take you to task for your manner of living. It is a course many have chosen with varying results. You have made your bed, now lie in it. I need only say that I am bitterly disappointed in my son. Henceforth we are strangers. Here is my personal check for $10,000. That is the last cent of Carmody money you will receive. Properly invested it will yield you a competence. Many men have builded fortunes upon less. As pocket money for a Broadway bill it will soon be squandered. Mechanically the younger man picked up the check from the table. I think, sir, he answered, that you have succeeded in making yourself perfectly clear. As a Carmody, I am a failure. You spoke of an investment. I am about to make one of which any McKim would approve. With slow, deliberate movements he tore the check into tiny pieces and scattered them upon the carpet. I shall leave your house, he continued, meeting the other's gaze squarely, without $1 of Carmody money, but with $10,000 worth of McKim self-respect. Goodbye. There was a note of cold finality in those last two words and the elder Carmody involuntarily extended his hand. He quitted the room abruptly as the boy, ignoring the civility, turned away. An hour later William walked hurriedly down the steps of the Carmody mansion and, with never a backward glance, hailed a taxi and was whirled rapidly uptown. Chapter 3. The final kick. It was Saturday, and Ethel Manton was lunching early that she might accompany her 15-year-old brother on a ride through the park. A certain story in the morning paper arrested her attention, and she reread it with flushed face and tightening lips. It was well done, as newspaper stories go, this account. A lurid night on Broadway which wound up in a crescendo of brilliance with the flooring of a policeman. No names were mentioned, but the initiated who read between the lines knew that only one man could have pulled off the stunt and gotten by with it. For goodness sake, Eth, aren't you ever going to finish? You'll waste the whole afternoon over that old paper. Young Charlie had bolted his luncheon and waited impatiently in a deep window seat overlooking the park. His sister laid down the paper with a sigh. Are the horses ready? She asked the question in a dull, listless tone, so unlike her usual self that even Charlie noticed. Gee. You don't seem very keen about it. And look what a day. You look like you were going to a funeral. Before the girl could reply he tumbled again to the window. Look, a taxi is stopping and somebody is getting out. Oh, it's Bill Carmody. Ain't he a crackerjack, though? Say, Eth, why don't you marry Bill? He's just crazy about you, everybody says so, and, Charlie. The word was jerked out hysterically, and the boy was puzzled at the crimson of her face. Well, I don't care, it's so. And then I'd be a brother-in-law to Bill Carmody. Why, he can lick everybody down to the gym. He put on the gloves with me once, he boasted, swelling visibly, just sparring, you know, but he promised to teach me the game. And football. There never was a halfback like Bill Carmody. Why he underscore do hush. He might hear you. Run along, now. You ride on and I will overtake you. I must see Mr. Carmody alone. Mr. Carmody. So you two have had a scrap. Well, if I was a girl, and Bill Carmody wanted to marry me, you bet, I'd marry him before he got a chance to change his mind. You bet, when I grow up I'm going to be just like him, so there. The boy flounced defiantly out of the room, leaving the girl alone with a new fear. Since the death of her parents she had bravely and capably undertaken the management of the household, and her chief care was this impulsive boy who was so dear to her heart. Look after Charlie as long as he shall need you. The words of her dying mother came to her vividly. He is really a noble little fellow, but hard to manage. And now, added to the sorrow that already seemed crushing her, was this new anxiety. Charlie had set up an idol, and the fact that his idol was also her idol, although she never admitted it, struck fear to her heart. For few discerning eyes of the boy were blind to the feet of clay. In the library across the hall, William Carmody paced nervously up and down, pausing at each turn to gaze abstractedly out of the window. After what seemed an interminable wait, the portieres pulled and the girl stepped into the room. In her hand she carried a carefully folded newspaper. She crossed to the table and, regarding the man with a cold, disconcerting stare, waited for him to speak. "Hello, Ethel." "No, thank you, I have had luncheon." His gaze encountered the unwavering blue eyes, and he suddenly dropped the air of flippant assurance. I came to see you," he added lamely. "Yes." There was little of encouragement in the word with its accompanying inflection. "You see, I am leaving New York." "Indeed." "Yes, I am going away." He paused, but receiving no answer, continued, "I am going away to make good. And I came to say goodbye. When I return, if you are still free, I will have something to tell you, something I have often told you before, but, well, things will be different, then. Suppose you said goodbye to your other friends last night." Her glance rested for a moment on the folded newspaper, and the silky sneer of her retort was brutal, with the studied brutality of the female of the species who would inflict pain. The man winced under its sting. "Last night cannot be recalled," he replied gravely. "Whatever happened then is past and gone. You are right, figuratively speaking, I have said goodbye to the others, to Broadway, and all it stands for. You alone know of my going. I am making no promises. If I fail no one will know, nor care. When I make good I will return, and then," the girl looked up. Their glances met, and in the depths of the steady grey eyes the soft blue ones read purpose, unflinching purpose to fight and win for the glory of an infinite love. Her eyes dropped. She felt the hot blood mount to her face under the compelling magnetism of his gaze. She loved this man. In all the world no other could so move her. She loved yet feared him. The very strength of him, the overmastering force of his personality, his barbaric disregard of conventionality at once attracted and frightened her. In that moment she knew, deep down in her heart, that if this man should take her in his arms and hold her close against the throbbing of his great heian, his lips find hers, and should he pour into her ears the pent-up torrent of his love, her surrender would be complete. His was the mastermind, and in all the years to come that mind would rule, and she, the weaker one, would be forced under the yoke of its supremacy. She prayed for strength. Let those who believe that once the living flesh has turned to clay the spirit dies, ascribe to a trick of Mem 01Y the vision of her dying mother that flashed before the eyes of the girl, and the whispered words, 11.400K after Charlie as long as he shall need you. But those there are who know that in that momentary vision spoke in faint memory whispers the gentle spirit mother, who, ranking high in that vast army which, in the words of the immortal Persian, before us passed the door of darkness through, would guide the footsteps of her loved ones. Thus strength came and steeled the heart of one great little woman who battled alone against love for her right to rule and shape the destiny of lives. The momentary flush receded from her face, and when her eyes again sought the man's, their glance was coldly repellent. She even forced a smile. "Is it so amusing, then, my going?" he asked a little grimly. "Yes, rather amusing to consider where a man would go and what he would do. A man, I mean, whose sole recommendation seems to be that he can lick most anybody, and can drink more and stay sober than any of the sports he travels with." The dull red flooded the man's face at her words. Unconsciously he squared his shoulders and there was an unwonted dignity in his reply. "I am well aware that my accomplishments are more in the nature of liabilities than assets. In spite of this I will make good, somewhere." He stepped closer to the girl, and his voice grew harsh, almost rasping in its intensity. "I can beat the game. And I will beat it, now. Just to show you and your kind what a man can do, a man, I mean," he added, "whose sole recommendation seems to be that he can lick most anybody, and can drink more and stay sober than any of the sports he travels with. Incidentally, I am glad to know your real opinion of me. I once believed that you were different from the others, that in you I had found a woman who possessed a real soul." He laughed, a short, grating laugh, deep down, as though rude fingers drew a protest from raw heartstrings, a laugh that is not good to hear. "Even thought," he went on, "that you cared for me, a little. That you were the one woman who, at the last of things, would give a man a helping hand, a little word of encouragement and hope, perhaps, instead of the final kick." He bowed stiffly and turned toward the door. "Goodbye," he said, and the heavy portieres closed behind him. In the room the girl, white as marble, heard the click of the front door, the roar of a newly cranked motor, and the dying chug-chug of the retreating taxi. That afternoon Charlie Manton rode alone, and when he returned, hungry as a young wolf, to be told that his sister had retired with a sick headache, he drew his own conclusions, nodding sagely over his solitary dinner. Later, as he passed her door on the way to his room, he placed his ear at the keyhole and listened a long time to her half-muffled sobs. "Gee," he muttered as he passed down the hall, "they must have had an awful scrap." He turned and quietly retraced his steps. In the library he switched on the lights and crossed to the telephone. "There isn't any sense in that," he said, speaking to himself. "Bill loves Eth, that's a cinch. And she does love him, too, even if she won't let on. She wouldn't stick up in her room all day bawling her eyes out if she didn't. I'll call Bill up and tell him so, then he'll come and they'll make up. I bet he's sorry, too, by now." At the Carmody residence he was told that Bill was not in. He received the same answer from several clubs, at each of which he left explicit instructions for Mr. Carmody to call him up at the first possible moment. Thereafter Charlie frequented the gymnasiums and made industrious inquiry, but it was many a day before he again saw his idol. Bill Carmody was missing from his accustomed haunts, and none could tell whither he had gone. Those were days fraught with anxiety for the boy. Ethel, to whom he was devoted, went about the house listless and preoccupied, in spite of her efforts to appear cheerful. When he attempted to reason with her she burst into tears and forbade him to mention Bill Carmody's name in her hearing as long as he lived. Whereupon the youngster retired disconsolately to his room to think things over. "Love's a bum thing," he told himself. "If they do get married they die or get a divorce or something, and if they don't, well, Bill has probably committed suicide and Eth is moping around, and most likely now she'll marry that dang St. Ledger." He made a wry face as he thought of St. Ledger. Runty little mollycoddle. Couldn't lick a chicken, him and his monocle. And that day the wind took his hat and rolled it off the mud, and he said, "Oh, pshaw, instead of damn it. Oh slush. And I promised mother I'd take care of Eth. He burrowed his face deep into the pillow, as, in spite of himself, tears came to his eyes. Chapter 4. Love or Hate. Thus a week passed, in the course of which the heart of the girl was torn by conflicting emotions. Love clashed with hate and self-pity with self-reproach. Was it true, what he had said? Had she administered the final kick to a man who was down, who, loving her, and deep down in her heart she knew that he did love her, had come to her in the extremity of his need for a word of encouragement? Now that he was gone she realized how much he had meant to her. How, in spite of his reckless disregard of life's serious side, she loved him. Try as she would, she could not forget the look of deep hurt that dulled his eyes at her words. Had she not been justified? Had he not needed just that to bring him to a realization of his responsibilities? Had she not, at the sacrifice of her own love, spurred and strengthened his purpose to make good? Or, had she, by raising a barrier between them, removed his one incentive to great effort? Over and over the girl pondered these things. One moment her heart cried out for his return, and the next she reiterated her undying hate for the man in whose power it was so sorely to wound her with a word. And so she sat one evening before an open fire in the library which had been the scene of their painting. Mechanically she turned the pages of a novel, but her mind was elsewhere, and her eyes lingered upon the details of the room. He stood there, she mused, and I hear, and then, those awful words. And, oh, the look in his eyes that day as the portieres closed between us, and he was gone. Where? Somehow the idea obsessed her that he had gone to sea. She pictured him big and strong and brave, battling before the mast on some wallowing, storm-hectored trading ship outbound, bearing him away into the melting pot of strange world ways. Would he come clean through them while, winning honor and his place among men? And thus would he some day return to her? Or would the sea claim him for her own, roughen him, and buffet him about through the long years among queer Far Eastern hellports where, jostling shoulder to shoulder with brutish men and the women who do not care, he would drink deep and laugh loud among the flesh pots of society's discards? The uncertainty was terrible to the girl, and she forced her thoughts into the one channel in which there was a ray of comfort. At least, she murmured, he has ceased to be a menace to Charlie. Mr. Hiram Carmody, Miss. The old man-servant who had been with the Mantons always, stood framed in the inverted V of the parted portieres. Ethel started. Why had he called? During the lifetime of her father the elder Carmody had been a frequent visitor in the Manton home. Was it about Bill? Was he sick? Had there been an accident, and was he hurt, possibly dead? There was an icy grip at her heart, though her voice was quite firm as she replied, "I will see Mr. Carmody at once, couldn't?" As the man silently withdrew from the doorway a new thought came to her. Could it be that Bill was still in New York? That his going away had been an empty threat? And was he now trying to bring about a reconciliation through the medium of his father? How she could despise him for that! Her lips thinned, and there was a hint of formality in her greeting as she offered her hand to the tall, grey-haired man who advanced toward her. "Well, well, Miss Ethel," he began, all alone with a book and a cosy fire. "That is what I call solid comfort." He crossed the room and extended his hands to the blaze. "It is a long time since you have called, Mr. Carmody." "Yes. We old fellows rarely drift outside the groove of our fixed orbit. One by one we drop out, and as each one passes beyond it shortens the orbit of the others. The circle is always contracting, never expanding. The last one of us will be found in his dotage, never venturing beyond the circle of his own fireside until he, too, shall answer the call." The voice held a note of sadness which touched the girl deeply, and she suddenly noted that the fine patrician face had aged. "You should not speak of being old," she said gently. "Why, you are called the Wizard of Wall Street." A man is only as old as he feels. Until recently I have considered myself a young man. But of late I feel that I am losing my grip. Isn't that a dangerous admission? If it should become known on the street, heavy grey eyebrows met with a ferocity which belied the smile that curved the thin lips, and if it were but whispered upon the street the wolves would be at my throat before morning. But they would have a fight on their hands. However, all that is beside the purpose. I suppose you are wondering why I called. The girl was momentarily at a loss for a reply. Why, you know you are always welcome here. Yes, yes. But, as you must have surmised, I called with a definite object in view. A matter that concerns you and, my son. The girl turned a shade paler. I do not understand, she replied. Nor do I. I have come to you at the risk of being thought a meddling old fool. But the fact is, I have several times lately heard your name mentioned in connection with Williams, and recently there came into my possession this packet of letters addressed to my son in a feminine hand and bearing the Manton crest. The girl's face flushed as she took the proffered packet and waited for him to continue. Fred Manton was my best friend, went on the old man, and I won't see harm come to his daughter, if I can prevent it. You two may be just friends, you may be engaged, or married, for all I know. My son never deemed it worthwhile to take me into his confidence. In either case, I am here, and I will have my say. I shall put myself in the place of your father and speak as, I believe, he would have spoken. I may seem harsh and bitter toward my own son, but remember, Miss Ethel, I have had vastly more experience in the ways of the world than you have, and I know whereof I speak. Slight as is the difference between your ages, you are but an inexperienced girl, as the world knows experience, and William is a man, and a man, I am sorry to say, who is no fit associate for a woman like you. Surprised and perplexed, the girl felt her anger rise against this man. Instinctively she rallied to Bill's defense. He is not bad at heart, she said resentfully. What worse can you say, returned Carmody with a harsh laugh. Of all expressions coined to damn a man with feigned praise, there is only one more effective: he means well. Ethel was thoroughly angry now. She drew herself up, and her blue eyes darkened as she faced him. That is not so, she cried. Bill is not bad at heart. And he does mean well. Whose fault is it that he has grown up reckless and wild? Who is to blame? What chance has he had? What have you done for him? Filled his pockets with money and packed him off to school. Filled his pockets with money and sent him to college. Filled his pockets with money and shipped him abroad. Then, without consulting his taste or desire, you peremptorily thrust him into a business which he loathes, on an office boy's salary and an allowance out of all proportion to his requirements. You say he has never taken you into his confidence. Have you ever invited that confidence? Have you ever sought his companionship, even his acquaintance? The man was astonished at her vehemence. Uncomfortably he found himself forced to the defensive. He had his chance. I placed him in the bank that he might learn the business as I learned it. If he had had the right stuff in him he would have made good. As it was, he attended to his duties in the most perfunctory and superficial manner. He showed not the slightest interest in the business. In fact, his position could have been ably filled by the veriest gutter snipe. And he is the man who one day, in all probability, would have come into control of the Carmody millions. And he would have scattered them in a riot of dissipation the length and breadth of Broadway. But I have forestalled him. He is footloose, gone, God knows where, to follow the fortune of adventure, perhaps, at the ends of the earth. For in him, transmitted in some unaccountable manner through the blood of the gentlest, sweetest little woman who ever warmed a hemi, is the restless spirit of the roistering, fighting McKims. Is it the boy's fault that he is a McKim? Returned the girl a little sharply. Who chose his mother? Of all men you should be the last to speak disparagingly of a McKim. Turn the pages of history and you will find written large in the story of the upbuilding of nations the name of McKim. Carmody Gold is the Kabbalah of Carmody suzerainty. But the McKim name has been carved deep in the annals of nations by sheer force of the personalities behind blades of naked steel. Even now the crying world need for men, big men, is as great as in the days when the fighting McKims deserted their hearthstones to answer the call of the falchions' clash or the cannon's roar. And someday you will realize this, when your bank messenger makes good. The old man regarded her with a look of admiration. You love him, he said quietly. The girl fled. Her eyes flashed and the play of the firelight gave an added touch of crimson to her cheeks. I do not love him. I hate him. Her voice faltered, and the man saw that she was very near to tears. A strange hate, this, Miss Ethel. A strange and a most dangerous hate for a girl to hold against a man who is a thief. Chapter 5. Thief. A man who is a thief. The words fell distinctly from Carmody's lips with the studied quiet of desperation. Ethel stared wild-eyed at the speaker, and in the frozen silence of the room her tiny fists doubled until the knuckles whitened. Noting the effect upon the girl, he continued, speaking more rapidly now that the dreaded word had been uttered. Had no wish to tell you this thing. It is a secret I would gladly have kept locked within my own breast. But I came here this evening with a purpose, to save, in spite of herself, if need be, the daughter of my dead friend from a life of suffering which would inevitably fall to the lot of any pure-hearted woman who linked her life with that of an unscrupulous scoundrel, in whom even common decency is dead, if, indeed, it ever lived. He is not a thief. He, began Ethel vehemently, but the man interrupted her. Wait until you have heard the facts. Last week, on Friday, there was entrusted to my son's care for delivery a heavy manila envelope containing $50,000 worth of negotiable bonds. It was a matter of vital importance that these be delivered within a specified time. Ignoring this fact, he pocketed the bonds, and, in company with a number of his acquaintances, indulged in a drunken spree which culminated after midnight in a disgraceful street scene in the Broadway theatre district. The following morning, when I confronted him, he flouted me to my face, whereupon I virtually disinherited him. Not wishing to turn him away penniless, I handed him a check for a considerable amount which he saw fit to destroy melodramatically in my presence. Upon my request for the return of the securities, he handed me an envelope identical with that in which the bonds had been placed. I carried the packet to the bank where it was opened and found to contain not the bonds, but those letters. To avoid a scandal I made good the loss. I learned later, through investigation, that upon leaving home he came directly to this house, where he remained for upward of a half-hour. Further than this I know nothing of his movements except that he rented the taxi and proceeded downtown. At 34th Street, where the chauffeur slowed down for instructions, he found the cab empty. And these are the facts upon which you base your accusation? Asked the girl coldly. You, his own father. To an unbiased mind the evidence allows but one interpretation. But his eyes. Oh, can't you see there has been some mistake? His eyes are not the eyes of a thief. There has been no mistake. A most thorough search of the premises has failed to disclose a trace of the missing securities. In his desk from which he took the substituted packet were found several similar envelopes, but these contained only worthless rubbish, newspaper clippings of sporting events and the like. No, Miss Ethel, when William Carmody left my house that morning he carried with him those bonds. And he came here, knowing that he was a thief, with his pocket bulging with plunder. As I told you, I know nothing of the relations existing between you and my son. I only hope that he has gone forever out of your life, as he has gone out of mine. The light died out of the girl's eyes and her voice sounded strangely dull as she replied, Yes, he has gone out of my life, maybe forever. He came to me here, to tell me that he was going away to make good. And I was not big enough to see it. I sent him away with a sneer. Bill is no thief. For what he has been, you are to blame, you and the Carmody money. For the first time in his life he has a fair chance. He has left New York the man you made him. He will return the man he makes himself. 011. If I only, there, Miss Ethel, your loyalty is admirable, if misplaced don't speak to me of loyalty. I have been as narrow and as mean as you have. My dear girl, you are overwrought. The sooner we learn that William Carmody has ceased to exist, the better it will be for both of us. I bid you good night. The girl sank into the depths of her big chair and watched the sputtering little jet flames lick futilely at the artificial logs of the fireplace. Believing herself alone, she was startled by the sound of footsteps hurrying noisily across the room. The next instant a tousle-headed boy with eyes ablaze was at her side, working her hands like pump handles. By Jimmy, Eth, you're a brick, the way you gave it to him. You bet I'll tell Bill how you stuck up for him. Charlie Manton. You were listening, eavesdropping. Elle didn't. I wasn't. I mean, I couldn't help hearing. The door of the den was open and I was in there studying. Old man Carmody is an old liar. Charlie, well, he is, and you know it. I hate him. You bet he wouldn't dare call Bill a thief to his face. Bill could lick funny seven like him with one hand tied behind his back. Bill is square. He wouldn't swipe $1 million, let alone a rotten, measly 50,000. Charlie Manton. What kind of talk is that? You ought to be ashamed. Well, I ain't, so there. And I'm Bill's friend, and I ain't afraid to say so, either. You do love Bill, and you know it. You can claim you hate him till you're black in the face, but you can't fool me. What did you stick up for him for if you hated him? I bet old man Carmody swiped the bonds himself. Stop right there. Aren't you ashamed to speak so disrespectfully of Mr. Carmody? He was an old friend of father's, don't care if he was. I'm an old friend of Bill's, too. And Bill ain't a thief, no matter what he says. You go to bed this minute. I am surprised and mortified to think that you would be so contemptible as to listen to other people's affairs. Tain't any worse than lying. The boy stamped angrily from the room, and the girl sat long by the fire and, one by one, fed letters to the flames. Chapter 6. The Crooked Game. Click-a-click, click-a-click, click-a-click. The monotonous song of the rails told off the miles as the heavy train lushed westward between the endless cornfields of a flat middle state. To the well-built athletic young man who was one of the 4 occupants of the little end-room, smoking compartment, the outlook was anything but cheerful. As far as the eye could reach, long rows of shriveled husks, from which the season's crop of yellow ears had been torn, flapped dejectedly against their dried and broken stalks. Here and there a square of rich, black loam, freshly turned, bespoke the four-handed farmer, while in the fields of his neighbours straggling groups of cattle and hogs gleaned half-heartedly in the standing roughage. Not much for scenery, is it? The offensively garrulous passenger directed his remarks to the young man, who abstractedly surveyed the landscape. No, sir, he continued, you've got to go west for scenery. Ever been west? The young man nodded without removing his gaze from the window. I live in Colorado, the other persisted. Went out there for my health and I stayed. Johnson's my name. I'm in the mining business. His eyes swept the compartment to include the others in the too evident geniality of their glance. Now that we're all acquainted, how about a little game of 7-Up, just to pass away the time? How about you, Dad? Thus flippantly he addressed the NLDDY-faced, middle-aged gentleman in grey tweeds, whose attention was apparently concentrated upon the lengthening ash of his cigar. With enthusiasm undampened by the curtness of the latter's refusal, He turned to the remaining passenger, a youth upon whose lips sprouted a tenderly PMNED mustache, so obviously new that it looked itchy. "How about you, Captain?" The top-heavy youth closed his magazine and unlocked a brain cell. "I don't mind." He ostentatiously consulted a very gold watch. "Must be in Chicago this evening," he muttered quite audibly, pulling a 10, 20, 30 frown that caused his labial foliage to instill with importance. He drew from his pocket a card upon which the ink was scarcely dry and handed it to the effervescent Johnson, who read aloud, "Mr. Lincoln Estabel, Municipal Investigator." "You see," explained its owner, "it has reached the ears of the managing editor of my paper in South Bend that vice in various forms flourishes in Chicago." Thereupon he immediately sent for me and ordered a sweeping investigation. Further information was forestalled by the entrance of a suave-mannered individual who introduced himself as a cigar salesman, and who was readily induced to take a hand in the game. The lightning-like glances that passed between the newcomer and the Western Mr. Johnson, while entirely unnoted by the investigator of municipal vice, aroused the interest of the athletic young man to the point of assenting to make the fourth. Here, evidently, was something about to be pulled off, and he decided to be actively among those present. The game progressed through several uneventful deals. Suddenly Johnson, scrutinizing a hand dealt him by the cigar salesman, emitted a low whistle. "If we were playing poker now I'd have something to say." 011, "I don't know. I've got some poker hand myself," opined the dealer. "Discard 1, to make a 5-card hand, and I bet you $5 I beat you. You're on." Each produced a bill which he handed to the athletic young man to hold. 3 8s and a pair of deuces, boasted the Westerner, exposing the full hand upon the board. "Beats 3 kings, admitted the other, ruefully laying down his hand. The winner pocketed the money with an exaggerated wink in the direction of the newspaper youth who had been an interested spectator. The game progressed, and before many deals another challenge was passed and accepted between the two. This time it was the salesman who profited to the extent of $25 which he received from the stakeholder with the remark that he would bet his whole roll on a jack full any old day. The elderly gentleman smoked in silence and amused himself by mentally cataloguing the players. Suddenly his attention became riveted. What he saw jarred harshly upon his estimate of the athletic young man who, at the conclusion of his deal, dexterously slipped some cards beneath the table from his pile of tricks, then, bunching the pack, passed it to the Westerner for the next deal. He was on the point of exposing this cheap bit of knavery when the young man glanced in his direction. Something in the steady gaze of the grey eyes, though for the life of him he could not have told what, stayed his purpose, and he settled into his seat, more puzzled than before. If it had been any one of the others, he thought to himself, and then to think that he turns around and with a look virtually makes me a party to his twopenny trickery. His reflections were cut short by a sharp exclamation from the investigator of vice who, in spite of his desire to appear composed, was evidently labouring under great excitement. "I'll bet $25 I've got the best poker hand this time." He was staring at his tight-gripped cards. Johnson looked his hand over, and with a careless, "Here's where I get even," tossed the amount to the athletic young man, who laid his cards upon the table. The cigar salesman broke in, "Hold on. I'm in on this, too. Got a pretty fair hand myself. And just to show you sports I'm game, I'll make it 100. He passed a handful of bills to the stakeholder and glared defiantly at the newspaper person who was in the act of returning a billfold to his pocket. "Why, that is all I've got," he gasped, "and it's expense money." "Well, of course," the other replied, "if you don't care to see my hand, and I don't mind telling you it's more than a middling good one, I'll hand that." Extracted the neatly folded bills from the leather case, shook, and the voice rose to a ludicrous "Got you beat, and if I had any more money with me I'd come back at you." "You've got a watch there," remarked Mr. Johnson. "Let's see it." "I ain't going to stay for the race. My 3 7s don't look as good as they did." "I'll paid $50 for it," piped the youth, passing the watch across the board. Both men examined it. "Oh, well, I don't know anything about watches, but I'll take your word for it." "Stick her up, here's the 50. "I've got 4 aces," squealed the reporter as he spread them out face upward. He stared wildly at the other, and his hands made wet marks where they touched the board. "No good," remarked his opponent blandly. "Mine's hearts, all in a row, with the jack at the top." One by one he laid them down, a straight flush. South Bend stared incredulously at the cards. "All right, Mr. Stakeholder," laughed the salesman, "pass over the kale. Just slip out a 5 for your trouble." "Just a minute." The voice of the stakeholder was quiet and his lips smiled. The 2 across the board bristled aggressively and the plucked one sniffled. "Well," there was an ugly note in the cigar salesman's voice, "a straight flush beats 4 aces, don't it?" 011, yes, there is no question as to that. "Are these the same cards we have been using?" "Of course they are." "What do you mean?" asked the dealer. 011, nothing. I just wanted to know. Our friend here has the right to know that he got a square deal. Count the cards." The look of apprehension on the faces of the 2 men faded into smiles. "Sure thing." "That's fair enough," acquiesced the dealer, proceeding to gather the cards from the board. Slowly and deliberately he counted, 50, 51, 52 he finished. "Here, Captain, count them yourself." He handed them to the youth, who mechanically ran them through. "They are all here," he admitted. "Now, that is funny," smiled the stakeholder, "because last deal I dropped several cards onto the floor. This gentleman saw me do it." He nodded toward the elderly gentleman, who was now keenly interested, and reached under the table. "See, here they are. And, by the way, the 9 and 10 of hearts are among them. And now, you cheap crooks," he added as he flung a handful of bills onto the board, "take your money and beat it." The 2 men opposite looked for an instant into the narrowing grey eyes, noted a certain tightening of the square jaw and the clenching of a pair of very capable fists, and tarried not upon further orders. Sweeping the money into their pockets they quit the compartment, casting venomous back glances toward the young man whose lips could smile while his eyes threatened. "Here is yours, kid. And let me put you wise to something. The first thing you do when you strike Chicago, buy a ticket to South Bend. They are waiting for you in the wicked town, they can see you coming. The next ones will spring a real live game, green goods, or wiretapping. They will roll you before you can locate a rescue mission. About the only form of vice they will give you time to investigate will be what the taxi boy does to you. The cold deck stunt you just fell for, Sonny, is so old it totters. It is the identical trick that started the coolness between Brutus and Julius Caesar." Chapter 7. The Wreck. The early darkness of late autumn settled over the flat country. Tiny lights twinkled from distant farmhouses as the limited plowed through the night. The athletic young man continued to stare moodily out of the window. The black expanse of country became more thickly studded with lights. They flashed in the foreground in regular constellations as the train whizzed with undiminished speed past tall block towers and tiny suburban stations. Long parallel rows, narrowing to a point under a distant hazy nimbus, marked the course of the outreaching arteries of a great city. Warning bells clanged peremptorily at the lowered gates of grade crossings. The car wheels crashed noisily over an ever-increasing number of frogs and switch points, an occasional brilliantly illuminated trolley car crept slowly over its rails, and the hundreds of green and red and yellow lights of the widening railroad yards lent a variety of color to the scene. That infallible harbinger of an approaching terminal, the colored porter, had appeared in the doorway, whisk broom in hand, when suddenly there was a grinding jar, the heavy coach trembled through its length, and from forward came a muffled roar followed by the tearing crash of riven metal. The car reared upward, Higher and higher it climbed to the accompaniment of the terrible crunching grind that proclaims undirected power and benumbs the brain with the horrid possibilities of energy. Uncontrolled. When almost perpendicular, the sleeper toppled and crashed sidewise across other tracks at right angles to its course. New sounds supplanted the mighty noise of tearing and rending, little sounds, the sharp jangle of smashing glass, and the thin wail of an infant. These were balm to the young man's ears as from a distance. It was very dark and he was conscious of a great weight which seemed to be crushing the breath from his body. He raised his arms and tore at the thing on his chest. It yielded slightly to the pressure of his hands but remained immovable. He reached above it and encountered metal, a large iron cylinder with projecting pipes twisted and bent. Frantically he tore at the weight, exerting to the utmost the mighty strength of his shoulders. Inch by inch he worked it sidewise, using the pipes as levers until at length it rolled free and settled with a crash among the wreckage at his side. The other, the thing that yielded, he lifted easily and sat up, filling his exhausted lungs with great draughts of cool air. His head ached terribly. He passed his hand across his forehead and withdrew it wet and dripping. He struck a match and as the tiny flame flickered and went out he struck another and another. At his side lay the torso of the young reporter, his head mashed by the heavy water cooler. He shuddered as he realized that this was the thing he had lifted from his chest. In the opposite corner the elderly man struggled to release his arm from the grip of a wedging timber. The body of the porter, doubled grotesquely, partially protruded from under a seat. His last match died out and he crept to the side of the imprisoned man. A heave at the timber satisfied him as to the futility of accomplishing anything in the darkness and without tools. He stood erect and groped for the door of the compartment which he located in the ceiling almost directly above him. Drawing himself through the aperture, he made the narrow passage, but such was the position of the car that it was only with the greatest difficulty he succeeded in worming his way along, using the dividing wall as a floor. He gained the body of the coach, and from the darkness about him came groans and curses mingled with great gasping sobs, and that most terrible of all sounds, the shriek of a woman in the night time. He located a window and, smashing the glass with his elbow, crawled through. From every direction men were running toward the scene of the wreck, calling to each other in hoarse, throaty bellows, while here and there in the darkness lanterns flashed. Sick and dizzy he lowered himself to the ground and staggered across some tracks. He snatched a lantern from the hand of a bewildered switchman and stumbled again toward the overturned car. Others swarmed upon it. He heard the blows of axes and the smashing of glass. Already an army of men were engaged in the work of rescue. Inert forms were passed through windows into waiting arms to be deposited in long, ghastly rows upon the cinders of the roadbed, under the flaring torches. A cold, drizzling rain was falling and the smell of smoke was in the air. A group of firemen hurried past carrying hand extinguishers. The lantern light gleamed wetly upon their black rubber coats and metal helmets, from under the brims of which their set faces showed grimly white. Far up the track an ambulance gong clanged frantically. The young man re-entered the coach through a window and made his way slowly toward the smoking compartment, pushing his lantern before him. Reaching the door, he peered over the edge. Someone was kneeling beside the elderly man, working swiftly by the narrow light of an electric pocket lamp. As his eyes became accustomed to the dim light of the interior, he realized that the elderly man seemed to be resisting the efforts of the other who knelt upon his unpinioned arm. From between the lips, which were forced wide apart, protruded the ends of a handkerchief. He was gagged. The hands of the kneeling man worked rapidly, but not in the prying loose of the timber which lay across the other's arm. From the side pocket of his coat, where it evidently had been hurriedly thrust, dangled a watch chain which the young man recognized as belonging to the dead reporter. Suddenly the atrocity of the situation dawned upon him. He had heard of such things, of the ghouls who haunt the scenes of great disaster, preying upon the bodies of the dead, robbing the helpless. With a curse he seized the wire-bound railway lantern. At the sound the man looked up. It was the cigar salesman. The young man swung the weapon with all his might. It cut the air in a descending arc, but the other avoided the blow and the heavy lantern crashed against the wall and went out. Without an instant's hesitation he dived through the opening and met the fiend as he was rising to his feet. Together they rolled among the wreckage. While no match for his antagonist in size, the pickpocket was tough and wiry and apparently uninjured. He fought viciously, with the violence of desperation. The athlete could hear the voice of the elderly man, who with his free hand had torn the gag from his mouth, roaring encouragement. He received a stinging blow on the cheek from which the warm blood gushed instantly. Nux, he thought, the cur. Suddenly his groping hand came in contact with the other's throat just above the rim of his collar. Instantly his fingers closed about yielding flesh, their ends biting deep between the muscles. As the clutch tightened, the man redoubled his efforts. His body writhed and he lashed out furiously with hands and feet. Blows rained upon the young man's head, but he burrowed close, shielding his face, and always his grip tightened, the finger ends drawing closer and closer together. He was only half conscious now and the blows ceased to hurt. He experienced a sense of falling from a great height. His subconscious mind concentrated upon one idea, to maintain his hold. He must grip tighter and ever tighter. The other ceased to struggle and lay limp beneath his body, but of this he knew nothing. The muscles of his arms were rigid, the clamped fingers, nearly together now, were locked, and all the world was a blank. Chapter 8. New Friends. William Carmody opened his eyes to a sense of drowsy contentment and well-being. That the elegantly appointed room over which his glance travelled was not his room, disturbed him not at all. He realized that his head was heavily bandaged and that the white-capped, linen-clad young woman at the window was a nurse. He watched her fingers move swiftly and surely in the fashioning of a small round of needlework. Her face was turned from him, but somehow he knew that she was young and, in a dreamy sort of way, hoped she was pretty. He thought of attracting her attention but decided to prolong the suspense. The chances were against it, so many girls are not. He closed his eyes and tried to think. The fact that he was in a strange room with his head swathed in bandages, and that a young and possibly pretty nurse sat at the window, evidently for the purpose of ministering to him, suggested a hospital. Young Carmody had never been in a hospital, but the atmosphere of this room did not in any way conform to his rather vague notion of what a hospital should be. There was no long row of white beds all just alike, nor white walls, nor tiled floors over which people tiptoed to and fro and talked in hurried, low-voiced tones, nor was the air laden with the smell of drugs which he had always associated in his mind with such places. He must ask the nurse. He was so drowsily comfortable that it was with an effort he opened his eyes. A rebellious lock of hair strayed from under her cap as she leaned over her work. The sunlight caught it and through the rich threads of its length shot tiny glints of gold. Ethel. The name sprang involuntarily from his lips, and even as he spoke he smiled at the thought. The girl laid aside her work and crossed to the bed. "You called?" she asked, and the man realized vaguely that her voice was low and very pleasant. "Yes, that is, no, I mean, you are pretty, aren't you?" He smiled frankly up at her, and somehow the smile was contagious. She even blushed slightly. "You must excuse me this time," he continued, "I must have been thinking out loud." "You seem to be well, a rather abrupt young man," she smiled. "But you must not try to think, yet. And my name is not Ethel." "Oh, that's all right. You can't help that, you know, I mean, I think your name is Vio Pretty, whatever it is," he floundered. "The TNRTH is, I don't seem to be able to say what I do mean. But really I am not a fool, although I don't suppose you will ever believe it. There, you have talked quite enough. The doctor said you must rest and not get excited." She smoothed the covers with little pats of her soft hands. "But what I want to know," he persisted, with a frown of perplexity, "is, where am I? You are all right, she soothed. You are here. But why am I here? Because. Now go to sleep like a good boy. The doctor will be here before long and he will hold me responsible for your condition. Oddly enough, her answers seemed eminently sufficient and satisfactory, and he closed his eyes and slept contentedly. Hours later he was awakened by the opening of a door. A tall, dark man, with a brown beard neatly trimmed to a point, entered closely followed by an elderly man who carried his arm in a sling, and whom young Carmody recognized as his fellow passenger of the smoker. At once the whole train of recent events flashed through his brain: the wild escapade on Broadway, the scene with his father, his parting with Ethel Manton, the wreck, and his fight in the dark, each in its proper sequence. He was very wide awake now and watched the brown-bearded man eagerly as he picked up a chart from the table and scrutinized it minutely. "How is the head?" the man asked, with his fingers on the pulse. "Fine, doctor. Wouldn't know I had one if it were not for these bandages. And your arm, sir," he added, with a smile of recognition toward the elderly man. "Doing fairly, thank you. It is broken, but our friend here thinks it will come along all right." The doctor, with a nod of approval, returned the watch to his pocket and was preparing to leave when his patient detained him with a question. "I have not been able to locate myself." "This is not a hospital, is it?" Hardly smiled the other, although it answers the purpose admirably. "This is the Brownstone Hotel." "With rooms at 20 per," gasped the invalid. "Doctor, someone has blundered. After buying my railroad ticket I had just $4 left, and no chance in the world of getting hold of any more until I connect with a job." The men laughed. "Elle must be going," said the doctor. "You two can chat for a while. Don't tire yourself out, young man, and in a day or two you will be fit as a fiddle. Wish I had your physique. That system of yours is a natural shock absorber. We NM across them once in a long while, half killed one day and back the next hunting for more on the rebound." At the door he paused. "Take care of yourself, eat anything that looks good to you, smoke if you want to, talk, read, sleep, and in the morning we will let you get up and stretch your legs. Goodbye." "Some doctor, that," laughed the patient. "Does a man good just to hear him talk." Most of them go away leaving the patient guessing whether the next visit will be from them or the undertaker, and rather hoping for the latter. But with this fellow the professional man is swallowed up in the human being. He fairly radiates life. The other smiled as he settled himself into the chair near the bedside, vacated by the physician. "Yes, he is a great doctor. Stands well toward the head of his profession. We have no finer in the Northwest." Young Carmody's face clouded. "But how am I to pay for all this? It is all well enough for you to laugh, but to me it is a serious matter. Young man, you are my guest. I don't know who you are, nor where you came from, but, by gad, I know a man when I see one. From the time you sat in that game to save that poor young fool from being fleeced until you dove into that black hole and throttled that skunk, they caught him, did they? Caught him? They had to pry him loose. You have got the grip of the devil himself. The police surgeon told me they would have to put a whole new set of plumbing in his throat. Said he wouldn't have believed that any living thing, short of a gorilla, could have clamped down that hard with one hand. And there I had to lie pinned down and watch him go through a dead man's pockets. It was our friend the reporter. And then he turned around and calmly went "Chlew off mine. Gad. If I'd had a gun." All the time he kept up a run of talk, joking about the wreck and the easy pickings it gave him. He was disappointed when he failed to find you, said he owed you something for gumming his game. Well, he found you all right, and when he gets out of the hospital he is slated for 20 years in Joliet. The man paused and glanced at his watch. "Bless my soul. It is after 2 o'clock. We will have luncheon served here." "It is a peculiar situation," mused the invalid. The last thing I remember is being in the thick of a railroad wreck, and here I wake up in bed, with a trained nurse in the room, to find myself the guest zero of a man whose name I do not even know. Appleton, H.D. Appleton, of Minneapolis. I am a lumberman, just returning from the National Lumbermen's Convention in Buffalo. And yours? He was interrupted by a tap at the door and a couple of waiters entered bearing trays. Chapter 9. Bill gets a job. After luncheon, over cigars, the conversation again became personal. Appleton regarded the younger man thoughtfully. You spoke of being temporarily out of funds. Allow me to loan you what you require. Thank you, sir, but I could not think of it. I am already deeply indebted to you. If it were only a temporary embarrassment I wouldn't mind. But I have no definite plans. I must find work, and I freely confess I don't know exactly how to go about it. It might be a long time before I could repay the loan. Then, too, if a man is broke he will tackle the first job that comes along, whereas if he had money in his pocket he would be tempted to wait for something better, no matter what was offered. If you work it right you can easily get a couple of $1,000 out of the railroad company, damages, you know. The younger man looked up quickly. Not me, he smiled. I have not sustained any loss to speak of. That crack on the head when the coach tipped over didn't even knock me out. And as for the pummeling I got afterward with the knucks, that was my own lookout. The railroad company is not to blame for that. No. Getting something for nothing is not playing the game, it savors too strongly of the methods of our friend the pickpocket. As he talked the elder man subjected him to a careful scrutiny. He noted the deep-set, unwavering eyes, the smiling lips, and the firm, square set of the jaw. So you are really in earnest about going to work? In earnest. Mr. Appleton, you have just witnessed a fair demonstration of the demands of my appetite with a nod toward the array of empty dishes. I am subject to those attacks on an average of 3 times a day. In my pocket are just 4 $1 bills. Can you guess the answer? The lumberman smiled. What kind of position were you thinking of? What is your business? Haven't any. And I am not thinking of a position. What I want is a job. Know anything about lumber? The two smoked in silence while the waiters removed the remains of the luncheon. When the door closed behind them the lumberman spoke. He dropped the conversational tone and his words cut crisp and to the point. Young man, I can use you. If you are footloose and are willing to work, I will give you your chance. I am going to put it up to you straight and let you decide for yourself. Can use you in my office at a very fair salary. In 2 or 3 years you will, in all probability, become a valuable clerk, later, a lumber salesman at a good salary and better commissions. Your duties will not be strenuous, and as you enlarge your acquaintance you will naturally assume the social position to which you are entitled. Or I can use you in the woods. Send you into a logging camp to learn the business where it starts. Up there the work is not easy. Instead of a salary you will receive wages, and you will earn them, every cent of them. There are no snap jobs in a logging camp. Everybody, from the boss down, works, and works hard. Instead of roast lamb and green peas you will eat salt pork and baked beans. You will be called a lumberjack, a social pariah. Your associates will be big men, some good and some bad as they make them, and all rough. Good and bad, they would rather fight than eat, and they would rather watch others fight than fight. In summer you can loaf and blow in your wages, or you can go into the mills and learn how lumber is made, learn to tell at a glance whether a log will saw to the best profit into bridge timber or lath. It is no sinecure, the life of the logging camp. 100 times you will be called upon to face battle, murder, and sudden death, and it will be up to you to make good. In the office I have clerks who will be found at the same desk 20 years from now. And in the woods I have hundreds of swampers, skidders, and sawyers who will always be swampers, skidders and sawyers. I have camp bosses who will always be camp bosses, and a few who will become lumbermen. But the man who comes up through that school is the man who learns the game, the man who eventually will sit behind locked doors and talk in millions, while the office-made salesman is out on the road dicking in carloads. He paused and relighted his cigar. And you are offering me the choice of these jobs? Just so. Take your time. Think it over carefully and give me your answer in the morning. I have already made up my mind. If it is just the same to you, I will go to the woods. I need the exercise, he grinned. By the way, you have not told me your name. Bill, he answered, and watched the blue smoke curl upward from the end of his cigar. Bill what? Appleton regarded him through narrowing lids. Bill, he repeated. Just Bill, for the present, and no references. Sometime, if I make good, perhaps, but surely Bill ought to be name enough for a lumberjack. Well, Bill, you are hired. Most men would call me a fool. Maybe I am, but it's got to be proven. I came up tin off the woods myself and I know men. It is my business to know men. A name is nothing to me, nor references. Both are easy to get. I hire men, not names. And as for references, I don't pay for past performances. It is up to you to make good. I like your eyes. There is honesty in those eyes, and purpose. Your mother's eyes, I should say. The young man turned his face away and the blood surged upward, reddening the skin below the white bandages. Thoughts of his mother crowded his brain, the beautiful, gentle girl mother, who used to snatch him up and hold him close, way back in the curly locks days. He remembered her eyes, deep, soft blue eyes that shone bright and mysterious with love for the little boy, so often such a bad, self-willed little boy, and he thought of the hurt in those eyes. It was his very worst punishment in the long ago, to read the pain and sorrow in those eyes. No, 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 he murmured. Not her eyes, not mother's. Oh, I am glad that she did not live to know. He stopped abruptly and faced the other, speaking quietly. Mr. Appleton, I am not a criminal, not a fugitive from justice, as you may have guessed. But I have been an awful fool. The older man arose and extended his hand. Goodbye, Bill. You better sleep now. I will see you in the morning. As the door closed behind Appleton, the pleasant-voiced nurse appeared at the bedside. She straightened the covers, patted the pillows into shape, and fed the patient medicine out of a spoon. She hesitated when she finished and smiled down at him. Would you like to send any messages? She asked. Telegrams, to let your people know you are safe. Young Carmody returned the smile. The nurse looked into his face and knew that behind the smile was sadness rather than mirth. No, he said, there is no one to tell. She leaned over and laid soft fingers on his bandaged brow. Isn't there a real Ethel, somewhere? He did not resent the question of the sweet-faced nurse. Yes, he answered, there is a real Ethel, but she would not care. Nobody cares. Chapter 10. Northward, ho! Buck Muncrossan was a big man with a shrunken, maggoty soul, and no conscience. He had learned logging as his horses learned it, by repetition of unreasoning routine, and after 15 years' experience in the woods Appleton had made him a camp boss. His camps varied from year to year in no slightest detail. He made no suggestions for facilitating or systematizing the work, nor would he listen to any. He roared mightily at the substitution of horses for oxen, he openly scoffed at donkey engines, and would have none of them. During his years as a sawyer, by the vetty brute strength and doggedness of him, he had established new records for laying down timber. And now, as boss, he bullied the sawyers who could not equal those records, and hated those who could. Arbitrary, jealous, malignant, he MLED his camps with the bluff and bluster of the born coward. Among the lumberjacks, He was known and hated as a hard driver of men and a savage fighter. In the quick, brutish fights of the camps, men went down under the smashing blows of his huge fists as they would go down to the swing of a derrick boom, and, once down, would be jumped upon with corked boots and spiked into submission. It was told in the woods that whiskey flowed unchallenged in Buck Muncrosson's camps. His crews were known as hard crews. They hired out for tough hands, and it was up to them to play their string out. At the first cry of Gillen, stormy days when the crews cannot work, flat flasks and round black bottles circulated freely in the bunkhouse, and the day started, before breakfast, in a wild orgy of rough horseplay, poker, and profanity. But woe betide the man who allowed overindulgence to interfere with the morrow's work. Evil things were whispered of Muncrosson's manhandling of holdovers. In the office, back in Minneapolis, if these things were known they were winked at. For Muncrosson was a boss who got out the logs and the details of his discipline were unquestioned. On the Appleton holdings along Blood River the pines stood tall and straight and uncut. In the years of plenty, those wasteful years of frenzied logging, when white pine lumber brought from $12 to $20 a thousand and rival concerns were laying down only the choicest of logs, Appleton's crews were ordered to clean up as they went. Toothpick logging it was called then, and H.D. Appleton was contemptuously referred to as the toothpicker. 20 years later, with the market clamoring for white pine at any price, Appleton was selling white pine, while in the denuded forest the crews of his rivals were getting out cull timber and Norway. And this fall Appleton sent Buck Muncrosson into the Blood River country with orders to put 10 million feet of logs into the river by spring. So it was that the few remaining inhabitants of Hilarity were aroused from their habitual apathy one early fall evening by the shrill shrieks of an engine whistle as Muncrosson's 10-car train, carrying crew and supplies for the new camp, came to a stop at the Rusty Switch. There was something reminiscent in this whistle sound. It came as a voice from the past. Time was, some 8 or 10 years before, when the old number 9 and her companion engine, No IL, whistled daily and importantly into Hilarity, pushing long strings of flats onto the spurs, and then whistled out again with each car groaning and creaking under its towering pyramid of logs. But that was in the days of Hilarity's prosperity, in the days when the little town was the chief loading point for 2,000 square miles of timber. It had been a live town then, work and wages and the spirit to spend quick, hot life, and quick, cold death danced hand in hand to the clink of glasses. Everything ran wide open, and all night long rough men sinned abysmally in their hell-envied play, and, crowding the saloons, laughed and fought and drank red liquor in front of long pine bars, where the rattle of chips and the click of pool balls, mingled with lurid profanity, floated out through the open doors and blended with the incessant tintinnabulation of the dance hall pianos. These were the days of Hilarity's prosperity, when 20 trainloads of logs were jerked from her spurs by day, and the nights rang loud with false laughter. A vanished prosperity, for now the little town stood all but deserted in its clearing, with the encircling hills denuded of all vegetation save a tangle of underbrush and a straggling growth of stunted jack pine. Even the pig-iron hardwood men had gleaned the last stick from the ridges, and Hilarity had become but a name on the map. Only those remained who were old or crippled, and a very few, who had undertaken to grub out tiny farms among the stumps. Each evening these forlorn remnants were wont to forsake their stolid-faced wives and yamming offspring and pick their way through the solitary stump-dotted street, past windowless, deserted buildings which were the saloons and dance halls of better days, to foregather around the huge stove in the rear of Hodberg's General Store, which was decrepit Hilarity's sole remaining enterprise, and there to brag and maunder over the dead town's former glory. The fact that certain of Hod's jugs never tilted to the filling of the vinegar bottles or molasses pails of the women, not only served to ensure unflagging attendance, but the sale of their contents afforded the storekeeper a small but steady income which more than offset any loss incident to the preoccupied inroads upon his cracker barrel. The sound of the once familiar whistle brought the men tumbling from Burge's door, while up and down the Desson Street aproned forms stood framed in the doorways, beflanked by tousled heads which gazed wonder-eyed from behind tight-gripped skirts. Not a person in town, except the very newest citizens, and they were too young to care, for nobody ever came to Hilarity except by the Stork route, but recognized old number 9's whistle. Strange, almost apologetic, it sounded after its years of silence, not at all like the throaty bellow of derision with which the long, vestibuled coast trains thundered through the forsaken village. A brakesman leaped from the cab and ran ahead. Stooping, he cursed the corroded lock of the unused switch which creaked and jarred to the pull of the lever as old No 9 headed wheezily onto the rust-eaten rails of the rotting spur. An hour later she puffed noisily away, leaving Muncrosson's crew encamped in the deserted cabins and dilapidated saloons of the worn-out town. Muncrosson, by making use of old tote roads, saved about 40 of the 80 miles of road building which lay between Hilarity and the Blood River. Toward the end of October the work was completed, the camp buildings erected, and a blush and log dam thrown across the river at the narrows of a white water rapid. Swampers and axemen set to work building skidways and cross hauls, and the banks of the river were cleared for the rollways. The ground was still bare of snow, but the sawyers were laying them down and the logs were banked at the skidways. Then one morning the snow came. Quietly it fell, in big, downy flakes that floated lazily to earth from the even grey of the cloud-spread sky, tracing aimless, zigzag patterns against the dark green background of the pines, and covering the brown needles of the forest floor and the torn mould of the skidways with a soft blanket of white. The men sprang eagerly to their work, heartened by the feel of the snow. The tingling air was filled with familiar man sounds, the resonant stroke of axes, and the long crash of falling trees, the metallic rattle of chains, the harsh rasp of saws, and the good-natured calls of men in rude banter, sounds that rang little and thin through the mighty silence of the forest. Gradually the flakes hardened and the zigzag patterns resolved themselves into long, thread-like lines which slanted earthward with a soft hissing sound. Fast it fell, and faster, until the background disappeared, and all the world was a swift-moving riot of white. It was a real snow now, a snow of value which buried the soft blanket of the feathery flakes under a stable covering which would pack hard under the heavy runners of the wide log sleds. It lodged in thick masses in the trees whose limbs bent under the weight, and the woods rang to the cries of the sawyers when the tottering of a mighty pine sent a small avalanche hurtling through the lower branches, half burying them in its white smother. As the early darkness of the north country settled about them the men ploughed heavily to the bunkhouse through 1.5 feet of fresh fallen snow, and still it snowed. Chapter 11. Bill hits the trail. In a long abandoned shack midway between Muncrosson's Blood River camp and Hilarity, Bill Carmody hugged close the rusty, broken stove. All day he had tramped northward, guided through the maze of abandoned roads by the frozen ruts of Muncrosson's tote wagons, and it was long after dark when he camped in the non-hemost of the old shacks with civilization, as represented by Hilarity's deserted buildings and the jug-tilting, barrel-head conclave of Hodberg's store, 40 miles to the southward. It had been a hard day, this first day of his new life in the Northland. And now, footsore, dog-tired, and dispirited, he sat close and fed sticks to his guttering fire which burned sullenly and flared red for want of draught. The chinking had long since fallen from between the logs and the night wind whipped the smoke in stinging volleys from gaping holes in the rust-eaten jacket of the dilapidated airtight. Tears streamed from the man's smoke-tortured eyes, every muscle of his body ached horribly from the unaccustomed trail strain, and his feet, unused to the coarse woolen socks beneath heavy boots, were galled and blistered until the skin hung in rolls from the edges of raw scalds. He removed his footgear and the feel of the cold wind was good to his burning feet. He scowled resentfully at the galling newness of his high-laced boots and with a tentative finger explored his hurts. Unbuckling his pack, he drew forth the ready-prepared food with which he had supplied himself at the store. The pack had seemed trifling when he swung lightly into the trail that morning, but 12 hours later, when he stumbled painfully into the disused shack, it had borne upon his aching shoulders as the burden of Atlas. Hungry as he was, He glared disgustedly at the flaunting label off salmon can and the unappetizing loaf of coarse bread dried hard, rather than baked, from sodden dough, by Hodberg's slovenly spouse. And as he glared he pondered the words of advice offered by the old man with the twisted leg who sat upon Berg's counter and punctuated his remarks with quick, jerky stabs of his stout, homemade crutch. "Tha can't fish Benty no good fr trail grub, son. Ye greener, you be. Better ye lay in what'll stay by ye, a bit o' bacon, like, or some bologna, and a little tin coffee pot yonder. Ye'll be thinking o' steppin' out the door ye new boots and ye packin' trippin' up to Blood River in maybe it's 2 walks, naught in ye belly but a can o' cold fish and a stun weight o' Mary Burge's bread, which there ain't no more raisin into it nor a toggle chain. T's plain ye a greener, son, but take an old fool's advice and get ye a pair zero the shoe packs yonder to spell off the boots. Brand new, they be, and they'll gald ye feet till ye'll be walkin' ankle deep in hell again night. I'll be telling ye Blood River lays a fine 2 walks pr a good man, and his boots broke into the wear." Now Bill Carmody was, by environment, undemocratic, and he resented being called a greener. Also the emphasis which old Daddy Dunnigan had placed upon the words good man in evident contrast to himself, rankled. How he wished, as he sat in the cold discomfort of the shack, that he had heeded the timely and well-meant advice. His was not an arrogant nature, nor a surly, but the change in his environment had been painfully abrupt. All his life he had chosen for companions men whom he looked upon as his social equals, and he knew no others except as paid hirelings to do his bidding. And all his life money had removed from his pathway the physical discomforts incident to existence. But all this was in the past. Unconsciously he was learning a lesson, and this first lesson would be hard, but very thorough, and the next time he met Daddy Dunnigan he would take him by the hand. For here was a man, a good man, in the making. But a man new to his surroundings. A man who would learn hard, but quickly, and who would fight hard against the very conditions which were to make him. His perspective must first be broken on the wheel of experience, that he might know human nature, and the relative worth of men. His unplastic nature would one day be his chief bulwark, as now, it was his chief stumbling block. For in his chosen life work he must take men, many men, rough men, of diverse codes and waning creeds, and with them build an efficient unit for the conquering of nature in her own fastnesses. And this thing requires not only knowledge and strength, but courage, and the will to do or die. Alighting from the caboose of the local freight train on the previous evening, he entered Hodberg's door as he had entered the doors of trades places all his life. To him, Hodberg was not a personality, but a menial existing for the sole purpose of waiting upon and attending to the wants of him, Bill Carmody. The others, the old men, and the crippled ones, and the hard-handed grubbers of stumps, who sat about in faded mackinaws and patched overalls, he regarded not at all. He deposited his pack-sack on the floor where its canvas sides, out-bulging with blankets and duffel, fairly shrieked their newness. After some minutes of silence, a silence neither friendly nor hostile, during which Bill was conscious that all eyes were turned upon him in frank curiosity, he spoke, and in speaking, inadvertently antagonized the entire male population of hilarity. For in his speech was no word of greeting. He addressed no one in particular, but called peremptorily, and with a trace of irritation, for a salesman. Now, Hodberg was anything but a salesman. His goods either sold themselves or remained on their shelves, and to Mr. Burge it was a matter of supreme indifference which. He was wont to remark to hesitating or undecided customers that if folks didn't know what they wanted when they come into the store, they better keep away till they find out. So, in answer to the newcomer's demand, Hod shifted his quid and, with exasperating deliberation, spat in the direction of a sawdust-filled box near which the other was standing. Without rising from his seat in the one undamaged chair, he answered, "If it's the storekeeper you mean, I'm him." Then, as an afterthought, "Was they something you wanted?" Bill resented the implied rebuke in the storekeeper's words even more than he resented the bombardment of tobacco juice which barely missed his boots. Take it all in all, he was having a rather rough time of it. The railway people had refused to stop their fast train at Hilarity for his special benefit, and he had been compelled to get off at the nearest division point, some 40 miles to the westward, and continue his journey in the evil-smelling caboose of the local freight train which crawled jerkily over the rails, and stopped to shunt cars at every siding. Nearly the whole day had been consumed for the trip, during which time he had sat in the stuffy, superheated car, whose foul air reeked of cheap tobacco and drying garments, and listened to the guffaws of the train crew as they regaled each other with vile stories and long accounts of revolting personal experiences among the dives of cities. So now, tired, grimy, and with his head aching dully from the long breathing of foul air, he was in no humour for comprehensive amiability. He made his few purchases and replied curtly to the questions of the storekeeper. It is doubtful if he would have replied at all but for the fact that he must have information in regard to the whereabouts of Muncrosson's Blood River camp. There was a roar of merriment, which he answered with a scowl, when he inquired the location of the hotel. "Just help yourself, stranger," said Burge, with a generous sweep of the arm which included all Hilarity not within the confines of the room. "They's about 50 buildings, cabins, and shacks along the street, and you can take your pick. Rent's the cheapest thing they is in Hilarity, just kick out the rats and spread your blankets." It was when Bill stooped to add the gaudy labelled cans to his pack that Daddy Dunnigan, of the Twisted Leg, volunteered the bit of advice that fell upon his ears unheeded. He was openly resentful now, having detected certain smiles, winks, and nudgings with which the assembled men called each other's attention to various details of his clothing and pack. During the storekeeper's temporary cessation of vigilance while waiting upon his customer, the others had seized the opportunity to refresh themselves at his expense. A thick, heavy tumbler, so cloudy and begrimed as to be almost opaque, was filled from a large jug placed conveniently upon a sack of potatoes, and passed from one to the other, each absorbing little or much as the thirst was upon him, and passing it on to his neighbour. Daddy Dunnigan offered it to Bill along with the advice, but the latter ungraciously refused and, turning abruptly away, shouldered his pack and proceeded to select his hotel. "Wonder who's he," remarked Hodberg as he lazily resumed his seat. "Too damned uppity to suit me," vociferated Creed, Hilarity's self-alleged bad man, with a fierce exhalation that dislodged a thin volley of cracker crumbs from his overhanging moustache. "A heap too damned uppity for this camp, says I." He shook a hairy fist menacingly toward the door through which the man had departed. "It's lucky for him it was old Daddy there 'stead of me he wouldn't drink with, or I'd have went to the floor with him and teached him his manners." "Nor ye wouldn't," Creed said the old man. "Ye done jest loike ye done, set there atop your barrel and blinked. And when he'd went out ye blowed and bragged and blustered, and then fizzled out like a wet fuse. 'Stead of which I predict that the young fella's a real man, once he gets strung out. Anyways, I bet he does his fightin' whiles the other fellas there 'stead of settin' round and folks whiskey full 0 cracker crumbs." He gazed mifully into his half-filled glass. "Throw it out, Daddy, and have one on me," offered Bun Age, reaching for the jug. With a sly wink toward the others, the old man drained the glass at a gulp and passed it innocently to be refilled. "I'll let him go this time," rumbled Creed with a frown. "He's heading for Buck Muncrosson's camp. Muncrosson'll break him." "Or he'll break Muncrosson," interrupted Daddy, bringing his crutch down upon the floor. "The one camp'll not hold the two o' them for long. Heed ye now, I predict there'll be hell popping on Blood River, and be this time o' year for now 10 them two'll be broke for good and all, and, not to mention no names, it won't be yon stranger." The strong liquor had loosened the tongue of the ordinarily silent old man, and he continued, "I catched his eye fair, and 'tis the eye of a fightin' man, and the loike o' which I ain't seen since I looked for the last time in the dead eyes o' Captain Front McKim, in the second outbreak o' the Wild Boar, Hirakai, in the Brown Hills o' the Punjab." The men listened expectantly, for when the liquor was right the old man could tell of strange wars in far climes. One night the little hillman sneaked up on Captain Barclay's flying battery. They left his head and his men's stick in atop a row o' stakes and dragged the guns to a hilltop overlooking the pass. And in the morning they unlimbered, sweeping our left wing. Front McKim was captain o' the lights and I was a corporal. All that morning the Bok kept pepperin' away, W.I. Miss Fanny the colonel he was, and his parade ground staff 0 book soldiers, W.I. tables 0 figures in the book 0 rules and maps and a pair 0 dividers, trying to figure out how to chase a bad boff and a hilltop W.I. out climb the same. And he lived a long time after, did Miss Fanny, to die in his bed 0 some nice, fine disease, W.I. his family and his Scotch and soddy gathered about him. And he was put in a foine, big coffin W.I. a brand new flag spread atop to keep off the dust, and carried back to England in a warship, W.I. the harbour guns fire in salutes, the whiles Front McKim lays back among the hills o' Punjab, wrapped in his powder-burnt, shot-tore blanket. The hillmen and their women and the shiny hill kids give wide berth in passin', and make low salams to the grave o' the terrible fightin' Sahib that put the fear 0 God in the heart 0 the wild bull. And it's as Captain Front would wished, I know well. But, as I was saying, the whiles Miss Fanny was trying, by 9 times 6 is 47 and tragics and muzzle velocity and 4's right and holler squares, to wish the boff and the hilltops so he could march us through the pass a Cordine to Hoyle. Front McKim was off ahead among the rocks, laying on his belly behinter and hill studying the hillside through his spyglass. Well, long 'bout noon he come galloping up, W.I. his big black horse all alather, to where we was laying in the scrub cursin' the flies in the department and the outbreaks oboes. Come on, boys, he hollers, W.I. the glitter in his eye, I found the way. All together now, and we'll see the top o' yon hill or we'll see hell this day. W.I. that he tears loose a yell 'twould strike a chill to the heart o' an iceberg, and wheels his horse into the open, and us in the saddle and foalrin', all yellin' like a hellful o' devils turned loose for recess. The old man shifted his CMTCH and sipped at his liquor. Most o' us seen the top o' the hill he resumed, and the brown hillman, what of 'em wasn't laying limp by the guns, a skitterin' through the SCNLB after a boh who'd took off on a stray cavalry horse. But they was a many o' us as didn't, laying sprawled among the rocks o' the bare hillside, and their horses nin wild to keep up W.I. the charge. We found Captain Front W.I. his whole front blowed out by a shell and his shoulders kind 0 tumbled in where his lungs belonged, but them eyes was looking straight at the hilltop. And I looked in 'em long, for I loved him, and was glad. 'Cause I know Captain Front McKim was seeing hell, and enjoying it. He set down the empty glass and favoured Creed with a cold stare, and his eyes is like that, the stranger's, and yours ain't, nor CHAPTER 12. The test. With only one half of his journey behind him and the chill night wind whipping through the unchinked crevices of the deserted shack, with the prospect of an unsavoury supper of soggy sockeye and a lump of frozen bread, Bill Carmody fervently wished himself elsewhere. His mind lingered upon the long row of squat, fat-footed shoe packs which the old man had indicated with his gnarled crutch. How good they would feel after the grinding newness of his boots. And coffee, he could see the row of tin pots hanging from their wires, and the long, flat slabs of bacon suspended from the roof logs of the store. He found himself, for the first time in his life, absolutely dependent upon his own resources. He cut the top from a can of salmon and thawed out his bread on the top of the Dilty stove. He had no cup, so he used the salmon can, limping in stocking feet to the spring near the door, whose black waters splashed coldly in a tiny rivulet that found its way under the frozen surface 0 small creek. The water was clear and cold, but tasted disgustingly fishy from its contact with the can. As he entered the shack and closed the sagging door, his glance was arrested by an object half concealed in the cobwebbed niche between the lintel and the sloping roof logs, an object that gleamed shiny and black in the dull play of the firelight. He reached up and withdrew from its hiding place a round quart bottle, across whose top was pasted a familiar green stamp which proclaimed that the contents had been bottled in Bond. He carried it to the fire and with the sleeve of his mackinaw removed the accumulated dust from the label. Old Morden Rye, he read aloud, holding it close to the firelight. And as he read his thoughts flew backward to past delights. Here was an old friend come to cheer him in the wilderness. He was no longer cold nor hungry, and before his eyes danced the bright, white lights of the man-made night of Broadway. His shoulders straightened and the sparkle came into his eyes. Forgotten was his determination to make good, and the future was a remote thing of no present moment nor concern. Once again he was Broadway Bill, the sport. Carefully and deliberately he broke the seal and removed the cork-rimmed glass stopper, which he flung to a far corner of the room, for that was Bill's way to throw away the cork. There was nothing small in his make-up, and for why is whiskey, but to drink while it lasts? And one cannot drink through a cork-rimmed stopper. So he threw it away. Only that day, as he had laboriously stepped off the long miles, he had thought with virtuous complacence of the completeness of his reformation. He thought how he had refused to drink with Daddy Dunnigan from the smeared and cloudy glass half filled with the raw, rank liquor, across the surface of which had trailed the tobacco-stained moustaches of the half-dozen unkempt men. A week before he had refused to drink good whiskey with Appleton, but that was amid surroundings against which he had fortified himself, surroundings made familiar by a little veneered table in the corner of the tile-floored bar of a well-known hotel, and while the spirit of his determination to quit was strong upon him. Besides, it was good policy. Therefore, he ordered ginger ale, but Appleton drank whiskey and noted that the other eyed the liquor as the little beads rose to the top, and that as he looked he unconsciously moistened his lips with his tongue, just that little thing, as he looked at the whiskey in Appleton's glass. By that swift movement Appleton understood, for he knew men, it was his business to know men, and then and there he decided to send Bill to Muncrosson's camp, where it was whispered whiskey flowed freely. Appleton had no son, and he felt strangely drawn toward the young man whose eyes had held him from the time of their first meeting. But he must prove his worth, and the test should be hard, and very thorough. Appleton realized that to place him in any one of the other camps, where the ban was on whiskey, and where each smuggled bottle was ferreted out and smashed, would be no test. It is no credit to a man to refrain from whiskey where no whiskey is. But place a man who has created an appetite for whiskey among men who drink daily and openly, and enjoy it, who urge and encourage him to do likewise, where whiskey is continually before his eyes, and the rich bouquet of it in his nostrils, and that is a test. Appleton knew this, and knowing, he sent Bill to Muncrosson, and smiled as he bet with himself on the outcome. But there is one other test, the supreme test of all, of which even Appleton did not know. Place this same man alone, tired out, hungry, thirsty, and cold, with every muscle of his body crying its protest of aches against the overstrain of a long day's work, surround him with every attribute of physical discomfort, with the future stretching away in a dull grey vista of uncertainty, and the memory strong upon him that the girl, the one girl in all the world, has ceased to believe in him, has ceased to care. Add to this the recollection of good times gone, times when good liquor flowed freely among good fellows, and at this particular psychological moment let him come suddenly and unexpectedly upon a bottle of whiskey, good whiskey, of a brand of which he has always approved, that is the acid test, and in writing this I know whereof I write. And that is why Bill Carmody carefully and deliberately broke the seal and threw the cork away, and shook the bottle gently, and breathed deep of its fragrance, and smiled in anticipation as the little beads flew upward. The fire had died down, and he set the bottle on the floor beside him and reached for the firewood. As he did so a long, sealed envelope, to the outside of which was tightly bound a photograph, fell to the floor from the inner pocket of his mackinaw. As he stooped to recover it his eyes encountered those of the picture gazing upward through the half-light. A flickering tongue of flame flared brightly for a moment and illumined the features, bringing out their expression with startling distinctness. It was the face of the girl. The flame died out, leaving the pictured likeness half concealed in the soft semi-darkness of the dying embers. It seemed hours that the man sat motionless, staring into the upturned eyes, those eyes into which he had so often gazed, but which were now lost to him forever. And as he looked, other thoughts crowded his brain, thoughts of his father, and the scorn of their parting, thoughts of the girl, of her words, and of his own boast, "One can beat the game. And I will beat it, now. And some day you will know." His anger rose against the man whose own flesh and blood he was, who had driven him from home with words of bitter sarcasm, and against the girl and her sneering repudiation of him. He leaped to his feet and shook a clenched fist to the southward. "Told you I would make good," he roared, "and, by God, I will. I am a McKim, do you hear? I am a McKim, and I shall make good." He reached for the bottle and placed it beside him on the pine table. He did not pour out the whiskey, for he did not fear it, only if he drank it need he fear. Just one little drink, and he was lost, and he knew this. And now he knew that he would never take that drink, and he looked at the bottle and laughed as the girl had laughed when she sent him from her forever. "It's no go, old boy," he smiled, apostrophizing John Barleycorn. "Ill served you long, and well. But I quit. You would not believe that I quit, and came out here to get me. And you almost got me. Almost, but not quite, John, for I have quit for good and all. We can still be friends, only now I am the master and you are the servant, and to start out with, I am going to pour half of you over my blistered feet." He recovered the packet from the floor and looked long at the picture. "And some day you will know," he repeated, as he returned it to his pocket. Thus did the lonely girl in a far distant city unconsciously win a silent victory for the man she loved, and who loved her. Chapter 13. On the Tote Road. Very early in the morning on the day of the storm which had been welcomed by the lumberjacks of the Blood River camp, old Wabishk started over his trap line. The air was heavy with the promise of snow, and one by one the Indian took up his traps and hung them in saplings that they might not be buried. After the storm, with the Northland lying silent under its mantle of white, and the comings and goings of the fur-bearers recorded in patterns of curious tracery, Wabishk would again fare forth upon the trap line. With wise eyes and the cunning of long practice, he would read the sign in the snow, and by means of craftily concealed iron jaws and innocent-appearing deadfalls, renew with increased confidence in his winter set, the world-old battle of skill against instinct. On the crest of a low ridge at the edge of the old chopping where Muncrosson's new Blood River Tote Road made a narrow lane in the forest, the Indian paused. In the stump-dotted clearing, indistinct in the sullen dimness of the overcast dawn, rotted the buildings of the abandoned log camp. From one of these smoke rose. Wabishk decided to investigate, for in the Northland no smallest detail may pass unaccounted for. Swiftly he descended the ridge and, gliding silently into the aftergrowth of spindling saplings that reared their sickly heads among the stumps, gained the rear of the shack. Noiselessly he advanced, and, peering between the unchinked logs, surveyed the interior. A man sat upon the floor near the stove and laboriously applied bandages to his blistered feet. Nearby was a new pack-sack against which leaned a pair of new high-laced boots toward which the man shot wrathful glances as he worked. "Cheshire," muttered the Indian, and passed around to the door. A popular fiction Indian would have glided stealthily into the shack and, with becoming dignity, have remarked how. But Wabishk was just a common Indian, one of the everyday kind, that may be seen any time hanging about the trading posts of the North Country unimaginative, undignified, dirty. So he knocked loudly upon the door and waited. "Come in," called Carmody, and gazed in surprise at the newcomer, who stared back at him without speaking. Wabishk advanced to the stove, and, fumbling in the pocket of his disreputable mackinaw, produced a VO old and black cob pipe, which he gravely extended toward the other. "No, thanks," said Bill hastily. "Got one of my own." He eyed with disfavour the short, thick stem, about the end of which was wound a bit of filthy rag, which served as a mouthpiece for the grip of the yellow fangs which angled crookedly at the place where a ponion of the lip had been torn away in some long-forgotten combat of the wilds. Tobacco, grunted the visitor, with a greasy distortion of the features which passed for a smile. Oh, that's it? Well, here you are. Carmody produced a bright-coloured tin box, which he handed to the Indian, who squatted upon his heels and regarded its exterior in thoughtful silence for many minutes, turning it over and over in his hand and subjecting every mark and detail of its lettered surface to a minute's scrutiny. Finally, with a grunt, he raised the lid and contemplated the tobacco, which was packed evenly in thin slices. He stared long and curiously at his own distorted image, which was reflected from the unpainted tin of the inside of the cover, felt cautiously of the paraffined paper, and, raising the box to his nose, sniffed noisily at the contents. Apparently satisfied, he removed a dozen or more of the slices and ground them slowly between the palms of his hands. This done, he rammed possibly 1/10 of the mass into the bowl of his ancient pipe and carefully conveyed the remainder to his pocket. Match? He asked. And Bill passed over his monogrammed silver match box, which received its share of careful examination, evidently, however, not meeting the approval accorded the gaudy tobacco box. The Indian abstracted about 1/2 of the matches, which he transferred to the pocket containing the tobacco. Then, calmly selecting a dry twig from the pile of firewood, thrust the end through a hole in the broken stove, and after much noisy puffing at length succeeded in igniting the tightly tamped tobacco in his pipe bowl. "Thank you," said Bill, contemplating his few remaining matches. "You're a bashful soul, aren't you? Did you ever serve a term in the legislature?" The Indian's command of English did not include a word Bill had uttered, nevertheless, his mangled lip writhed about the pipe stem in grotesque grin. "Boots," he grunted, eyeing the bandaged feet. "No good," and he complacently wriggled the toes in his own soft moccasins. Bill noted the movement, and a sudden desire obsessed him to possess at any cost those same soft moccasins. Wabishk, like most Indians, was a born trader, and he was quick to note the covetous glance that the white Cheshire coat cast toward his footgear. "Will you sell those?" asked Bill, pointing toward the moccasins. The Indian regarded them thoughtfully, and again the toes wriggled comfortably beneath the pliable moose skin covering. Bill tried again. "How much?" he asked, touching the moccasins with his finger. The Indian pondered the question through many puffs off his short pipe. He pointed to the new boots, and when Bill handed them to him he carefully studied every stitch and nail of each. Finally he laid them aside and pointed to the tobacco box, which he again scrutinized and laid with the boots. "Match," he said. "Get a light from the fire like you did before, you old fraud. I only have a few left." "Match," repeated the Indian, and Bill passed over his match box, which was placed with the other items. Wabishk pointed toward the pack sack. "Look here, you red Yankee," exclaimed Bill. "Do you want my whole outfit for those things?" The other merely snlgged and pointed first at the bandaged feet, and then at the boots. One by one, a can of salmon, a sheath knife, and a blue flannel shirt were added to the pile, and still Wabishk seemed unsatisfied. While the Indian pored over the various articles of his pack, Bill found time to put the finished touches on his bandages, and, reaching under the table, drew forth the whiskey bottle and poured part of its contents upon the strips of cloth. At the sight of the bottle the Indian's eyes brightened, and he reached for it quickly. Bill shook his head and set the bottle well out of his reach. "Me drink," the other insisted, and again Bill shook his head. The Indian seemed puzzled. "No like?" he asked. "No like," repeated Bill, and smiled grimly. Wabishk regarded him in wondering silence. In his life he had seen many strange things, but never a thing like this, a white man who of his own choice drank spring water from a fish can and poured good whiskey upon his feet. The Indian's eyes wandered from the pile of goods to the bottle, in which about 1/4 of the contents remained, and realized that he was at a disadvantage, for he knew by experience that a white man and his whiskey are hard to part. Selecting the can of salmon from the pile, he shoved it toward the man, who again shook his head. Then followed the matchbox, the sheath knife, and the shirt, until only the tobacco box and the boots remained, and still the man shook his head. Slowly the tobacco box was handed back, and the Indian was eyeing the boots. Bill laughed. "No. You'll need those. Just hand over the moccasins, and you are welcome to the boots and the booze." The Indian hastily untied the thongs, and the white man thrust his bandaged feet into the soft comfort of the moose-skin moccasins. A few minutes later he took the trail, following the windings of Muncrosson's new tote road into the north. The air was filled with a light, feathery snow, and, in spite of the ache of his stiffened muscles, he laughed. "The first bottle of whiskey I ever entered on the right side of the ledger," he said aloud, and again he laughed. He was in the big timber now. The tall, straight pines of the Appleton Holdings stretched away for 100 miles, and formed a high wall on either side of the tote road, which bent to the contour of ridge and swamp and crossed small creeks on rough log bridges or corduroy causeways. Gradually the stiffness left him, and his aching muscles limbered to their work. His moccasins sank noiselessly into the soft snow as mile after mile he traversed the broad ribbon of white. At noon he camped, and over a tiny fire thawed out his bread and warmed his salmon, which he washed down with copious draughts of snow water. Then he filled his pipe and blew great lungfuls of fragrant smoke into the air as he rested with his back against a giant pine and watched the fall of the snow. During the last hour the character of the storm had changed. Cold, dry pellets, hissing earthward had replaced the aimless dance of the feathery flakes, and he could make out but dimly the opposite wall of the rod-wide tote road. He returned the remains of his luncheon to his pack, eating with disgust the heel of the loaf of hard bread and the soggy, red mass of sockeye that remained in the can. "The first man that mentions canned salmon to me," he growled, "is going to get hurt." The snow was ankle-deep when he again took the trail and lowered his head to the sting of the wind-driven particles. On and on he plodded, lifting his feet higher as the snow deepened. As yet, in his ignorance of woodcraft, no thought of danger entered his mind. It is harder work, that is all he thought, but, had he known it, his was a situation that no woodsman wise in the ways of the winter trails would have cared to face. During the morning he had covered but 15 of the 40 miles which lay between the old shack and Muncrosson's camp. Each minute added to the difficulties of the journey, which, in the words of Daddy Dunnigan, was a fine 2 walks for a good man and, with the added hardship of a heavy snowfall, would have been a man's-sized job for the best of them equipped, as they would have been, with good grub and snowshoes. Bill was forced to rest frequently. Not only were his softened muscles feeling the strain, it was getting his wind, this steady bucking the snow, but each time he again faced the storm and plowed doggedly northward. Darkness found him struggling knee-deep in the cold whiteness, and, as he paused to rest in the shelter of a pile of tops left by the axemen, the foremost of the grey shadows that for the last 2 hours had dogged his footsteps, phantom-like, resolved itself into a very tangible pair of wicked eyes which smouldered in greenish points of hate above a very sharp, fang-studded muzzle, from which a long, red tongue licked suggestively at back-curled lips. Chapter 14. At bay. Bill Carmody was no coward, but neither was he a fool, and for the first time the seriousness of his position dawned upon him. Other shapes appeared and ranged themselves beside their leader, and as the man looked upon their gaunt, sinewy leanness, the slavering jaws, and blazing eyes, he shuddered. Here, indeed, was a very real danger. He decided to camp. Fire, he remembered to have read, would hold the brutes at bay. Wood there was in plenty, and, quickly clearing a space in the snow, he soon had the satisfaction of seeing tiny tongues of flame crackle in a pile of dry branches. He unslung his light axe and attacked the limbs of a dead pine that lay at the edge of the road. After an hour's work his cleared space was flanked on either side by piles of dry firewood, and at his back the great pile of tops afforded shelter from the wind which swept down the roadway, driving before it stinging volleys of snow. He spread his blanket and drew from his pack the unappetizing food. He warmed the remaining half-can of salmon and whittled at his nubbin of bread. "Dinner is served, sir," he announced to himself. "Dead fish with formaldehyde dressing, petrified dough, and aqua nivis." The storm continued, and as he smoked the gravity of his plight forced itself upon him. The laggards had caught up, and at the edge of the arc of firelight a wide semicircle of insanely glaring eyeballs and gleaming fangs told where the wolf pack waited. There was a terrifying sense of certainty in their method. They took no chance of open attack, wasted no breath in needless howling or snarling, but merely sat upon their haunches beyond the circle of the firelight waiting. Again the man shuddered. Before him, he knew, lay at least 15 miles of trail knee-deep with snow, and he had left but one small ration of unpalatable and unnutritious food. "I seem to be up against a tough proposition," he mused. What was it Appleton said about battle, murder, and sudden death? It looks from here as if the old boy knew what he was talking about. But it is kind of rough on a man to roll them all up into one bundle and hand it to him right on the kick-off. He had heard of men who became lost in the woods and died horribly of cold and starvation, or went down to the rush of the wolf pack. "As long as I stick to this road I won't get lost," he thought. "I may freeze to death, or starve, or furnish a cozy meal for the wolves yonder, but even at that I still have the edge on those others. I'm damned if I'm lost." And, strange as it may seem, the thought gave him much comfort. He tossed more wood on the fire and watched the shower of sparks which shot high above the flames. "Tomorrow will be my busy day," he remarked, addressing the wolves. "Good night, you hellhounds. Just stick around and see that nothing sneaks up and bites me." He hurled a blazing firebrand among the foremost of the hungry horde, but these did not retreat, merely leaped back, snarling, to lurk in the outer shadows. Bill's sleep was fitful. The snow ceased to fall during the early hours of the night, and the pair of blankets with which he had provided himself proved entirely inadequate protection against the steadily increasing cold. Time and again he awoke and replenished the fire, for, no matter in what position he lay, one side of his body seemed freezing, while the other toasted uncomfortably in the hot glare of the flames. And always just at the rim of the firelight, sat the wolves, waiting in their ominous circle of silence. But in the interims between these awakenings he slept profoundly, oblivious alike to discomfort and danger as the dead sleep. At the first hint of dawn Bill hastily consumed the last of his unpalatable food and resumed his journey. Hour after hour he toiled through the snow, and always the wolf pack followed, haunting his trail in the open roadway and flanking him in the deep shade of the evergreen forest, moving tirelessly through the loose snow in long, slow leaps. 17 of them he counted, 17 murderous, ill-visaged curs of the savage kill. And the leader of the pack was a very demon wolf. A monstrous female, almost pure white, huge, misshapen, hideous, the ultimate harridan of the wolf breed, she stood a full 2 hands above the tallest of the rank and file of her evil clan. The foot and half of a foreleg had been left between iron jaws where she had gnawed herself out of a trap, and the shrunken stub, depending from Orithod's shoulder, dragged over the surface of the snow, leaving a curious mark like the trail of a snake. The remaining foreleg was strong and thick and, from redistribution of balance, slanted inward from the massive shoulder, which was developed out of all proportion to its mate, giving the great white brute a repulsive, lopsided appearance. The long, stiff hair stood out upon her neck in a great ruff, which accentuated the fiendish ferocity of her, adding a hyena-like slope to her ungainly body. But it was in the expression of her face that she reached the climax of hideous malevolence. One pointed ear stood erect upon her head, while the other, mangled and torn into a serried red excrescence, formed the termination of a broad, ragged scar which began at the corner of her mouth, giving her face the expression of a fiendish grin that belied the green glare of her venomous, opalescent eyes. The loss of the leg seemed in no wise to hamper her freedom of action. She moved ceaselessly among the pack with a peculiar bounding gallop, fawning in subtle cajolery upon those in the forefront, slashing right and left among the laggards with vicious clicks of her long, white fangs, and always she watched the tiring man who found his own gaze fixed upon her in horrid fascination. There was something sinister in the wolf pack's noiseless pursuit. The brutes drew nearer as the man's pace slowed to the wearying of his muscles. Instinctively he knew that at the last there would be no waiting, no delay. The very minute he sank exhausted into the snow they would be upon him, the great white leader and her rapacious horde, and in his imagination he could feel the vice-like clench of iron jaws and the tearing rip with which the quivering flesh would be stripped from his bones. At midday the man placed the sheath knife in his belt and threw away the pack. Relieved of the burden, his shoulders felt strangely light. There was a new buoyancy in his stride. But the relief was temporary, and as the sun sank early behind the pines his brain was again driving his wearied muscles to their work. The wolves were following close in now, and the silence of their relentless persistence filled the man with a dumb terror which no pandemonium of howling could have inspired. His advance was halting. Each step was a separate and conscious undertaking, and it was with difficulty that he lifted his moccasins clear of the snow. Suddenly he stumbled. The leaders were almost upon him as he recovered and faced them there in the white reach of the tote road. They halted just out of reach of the swing of his axe, and as the man looked into their glaring eyes a frenzy of unreasoning fury seized him. His nerves could no longer stand the strain. Something seemed to snap in his brain, and through his veins surged the spirit of his fighting ancestors. A sudden memory flash, as of deeds forgotten through long ages, and with it came strength, the very abandon of fierce, BNLTE strength of a man with the mind to kill. "Come on," he cried. "Fight it out, you fiends. I may die, but I'll be damned if I'll be hounded to death. You may get me, but you'll fight. When a McKim goes down someone pays. And if it is die, by God, there'll be fun in the dying." With a weird primordial scream, as the first man might have screamed in the face of the first saber-tooth, he hurled his axe among them and sprang forward, flashing the cold, grey blade of his sheath knife. Chapter 15. The Werewolf. Now, as all men know, Bill Carmody had done a most foolish and insane thing. But the very audacity of his act, and the god of chance, favoured him, for as the axe whizzed through the air the keen edge of the whirling bit caught one of the larger wolves full on the side of the head. There followed the peculiar, dull scrunching sound that stands alone among all other sounds, being produced by no other thing than the sudden crush of a living skull. The front and side of the skull lifted and turned backward upon its hinge of raw scalp and the wolf went down, clawing and biting, and over the snow flowed thick red blood, and a thicker mucus of soft, wet brains. At the sight and scent of the warm blood, the companions of the stricken brute, the gaunt, tireless leaders, who had travelled beside him in the van, and the ragtag and bobtail alike, fell upon him tooth and nail, and the silence of the forest was shattered by the blood cry of the meat-getters. Not so the great she-wolf, who despised these others that fought among themselves, intent only upon the satisfaction of their hunger. Her purpose in trailing this man to destruction was of deep vengeance, the assuagement of an abysmal hatred that smouldered in her heart against every individual of the terrible mankind, whose cruel traps of iron, blades of steel, and leaden bullets had made her a monstrous, sexless thing, feared and unsought by mating males, hated of her own breed. And now, at the moment she had by the cunning of her generalship delivered this man an easy prey to her followers, they deserted her and fell in swinish greed upon the first meat at hand. So that at the last she faced her enemy alone, and the smouldering fury of her heart blazed green from her wicked eyes. She stood tense as a pointer, every hair of her long white coat bristlingly aquiver. Suddenly she threw back her head, pointed her sharp muzzle to the sky, and gave voice to the long-drawn ululation which is the battle cry of wolves. Yet it was not the wolf cry, for long ago the malformation of a healing throat wound had distorted the bell-like cry into a hideous scream like the shriek of a soul foredoomed, which quavered loud and shrill upon the keen air and ended in a series of quick jerks, like stabs of horrible laughter. And then, with tight-drawn lips and jaws agape, she hurled herself straight at the throat of the stumbling man. Darkness was gathering when, a mile to the northward, Jake LaFrance and Irish Fallon, who were labouring with 6 big horses and a rough log drag to break out the trail, suddenly paused to listen. Through the thin, cold air rang a sound the like of which neither had ever heard. And then, as if in echo, the long-drawn wail of the great white wolf. They stared at each other white-lipped, for that last cry was a thing men talked about of nights with bated breath and deep curses. Neither had heard it before, nor would either hear it again, but each recognized the sound instinctively, as he would recognize the sound of Gabriel's trump. "It's her," gasped LaFrance. "God save us! It's Diabolos, the loup garou. 'Tis none other, that last. But, man, the first one. Was it a human cry or from the throat of another of her hell-begotten breed?" Without waiting to reply, the Frenchman swung the big 6 team in their tracks and headed them toward camp. But Irish Fallon reached for him as he fled at the clevis. "Houd on, ye frog-eater! Be a man! If 'twas human tore loose that yell he'll be the baiter for help," notwithstanding there was more av for it nor fear in th sound. "No, no, no. It's her. It's Diabolos." He crossed himself. "Sure, and ut is, bad cess to her altogether. But I got here rt in me ribs a good red blood that takes relish now and again in a bit av for it. An, man or baste, oi ain't particular, so 'tis a good one. Oi'll be going down th thrail a piece and see fwhat's to see. Oi ain't axin' ye to go long. Ye poor prayer drevlin hathen, wid your limon av here rtuve got a yellow stripe that ratchs to th length and width av ye. Ye be no good how. But 'tis meself ain't fearin' thy evil eye av thy werewolf, and she is called be the name avth Deville's own. But listen ye here, ye pea soup Frenchy. Ye'll not go schnakin' off with them harses. Ye'll bide here till I come back." The other made a whimper of protest, but Irish Fallon reached out a great hairy hand and shook him roughly. "Yes man now, and I main ut. Here ye stay. And av ye ain't here, ye better cape on going. If a th next time I lay eyes on ye I'll be reek ye in two. And don't ye forget ut." The big Irishman turned and swung down the tote road, the webs of his rackets leaving a broad trail in the snow. LaFrance cowered upon the snow plough and sought refuge in craven prayer and curses the while he shot frightened glances into the darkening forest. He thought of cutting the horses loose and starting them for camp at a run. But, much as he feared the werewolf, he feared Irish Fallon more, for many were the tales of Fallon's man-fights when his Irish was up. When the white wolf sprang, the man had nearly reached the snarling pack. Before him, scarcely 6 feet away, lay his axe, the blade smeared with blood and brains, to which clung stiff grey hairs. Instinctively he ducked and, as the huge form flashed past, his right arm shot out straight from the shoulder. The long, clean blade entered just at the point of the brisket and, ranging upward, was buried to the haft as the knife was torn from his grasp. One step and the man's fingers closed about the helve of his axe, and he whirled to meet the second onslaught. But there was small need. The great BNLTE stood still in her tracks and, with lowered head, snapped and wrenched at the thing that bit into her view lungs. The staghorn plates of the protruding hilt were splintered under the clamp of mighty jaws, and the long, gleaming teeth made deep dents in the brass beneath. Her lips reddened, and before her the snow was flecked with blood. All this the man took in at a glance without conscious impression. He gripped his weapon and sprang among the fighting pack, which ripped and dragged at the carcass of the dead wolf. Right and left he struck in a reckless fume of ferocity, which spoke of unreasoning fights in worlds of savage firstlings. And under the smashing blows of the axe wolves went down, skulls split, spines crushed, ribs caved in, aside at a stroke, and shoulders were cloven clean and deep to pink sponge lungs. As if realizing that her hurt was mortal, the great she-wolf abandoned her attack on the knife haft and, summoning her strength for a supreme effort, sprang straight into the midst of the red shambles. The man, caught unawares, went down under the impact of her body. For one fleeting second he stared upward into blazing eyes. From between wide SPNMG rows of flashing fangs the blood-dripping tongue seemed to writhe from the cavernous throat, and the foul breath blew hot against his face. Instantly his strong fingers buried themselves in the shaggy fur close under the hinge of the jaw, while his other hand closed about the dented brass of the protruding knife hilt. With the whole strength of his arm he held the savage jaws from his face as he wrenched and twisted at the firmly embedded knife. Finally it loosened, and as the thick-backed blade was withdrawn from the wound it was followed by spurt after spurt of blood, bright, frothy blood, straight from the lungs, which gushed hot and wet over him. Blindly he struck, stabbing, thrusting, slashing at the great form which was pressing him deeper and deeper into the snow. Again and again the knife was turned against rib and shoulder blade, inflicting only shallow surface wounds. At length a heavy, straight-up thrust encountered no obstacle of bone, and the blade bit deep and deeper into living flesh. As with a final effort the knife was driven home, a convulsive shiver racked the body of the great white wolf, and with a low, gurgling moan of agony her jaws set rigid, her muscles stiffened, and she toppled sidewise into the snow, where she lay twitching spasmodically with glazing eyes. Bill staggered weakly to his feet. The uninjured wolves had vanished, leaving their dead upon the snow, while the wounded left flat, red trails as they sought to drag their broken bodies to the cover of the forest. Irish Fallon rounded a turn of the tote road. He brought up sharply and stared open-mouthed at the man who, sheath knife in hand, stood looking down at an indistinct object which lay upon the blood-trampled snow. Carmody turned and shouted a greeting, but without a word the Irishman advanced to his side until he, too, stood looking down at the thing in the snow. Suddenly Bill's hand was seized in a mighty grip. "Man! Tease her, and no mistake. She's done for at last, and blade to fang, in open for it yve knifed her. Sure, tease a gran twam yve had altogether," he said, glancing at the carcasses, "with 6 dead besides her and 3 more as good as." Bill laughed. "This wolf, the big white one, seems to enjoy a reputation, then." Our reputation? Our reputation, is ut? Good Lord, man. Don't you know her? Tis thy werewolfelderblish, th loop brow, the Frenches call her, and the White Devil, the Injuns, and good reason, if to me own knowledge she's killed 4 folks, big and schmall, and some Injuns besides. They claim she's a devil, and when she howls, 'tis because some soul has missed th happy huntin' grounds in th dying, and she's laughing. I don't know that I blame them," said Bill. "She favoured me with a vocal selection. And, believe me, she was no mockingbird." "Well, she looks dead, now," grinned Fallon, "but we'd best make sure. Oud man Frontenelle killed her wunst. 7 year back, ut was over on Monish. He shot her clean rough th neck and drugged her to his cabin bth tail. He was for skinnin' her flat rrth robe she'd make. He had her stretched out fwin wid a flash and a growl, she was at and wid one clap avth jaws she ripped away face and half th scalp. They found wanderin' blind on th lake ice and carried to Skellies for he died in 10 days twam av hydrophoby, schnarlin' and bitin' at folks till they had to chain in th room." As he spoke, Fallon picked up the axe, and with several well-directed blows shattered the skull of the Wenwolf against any possibility of a repetition of the Frontenelle incident. "But come, man, get your rackets and we'll be hittin' the Thrale PR camp." "Sure, French'll be sketched if we leave longer. Rackets? Asked Bill, with a look of perplexity. Your snowshoes, course. Haven't got any. And I don't suppose I could use them if I had. The other stared at him incredulously. Not got any. Thin how'd you get here? Walked, or rather, stumbled along. From. It started to snow as I left the old shack, the last one this way, I don't know how far back. It was there I traded my boots to an Indian for these. He extended a moccasined foot. "'Tis a good job you traded." But even at that, 35 Mwal Crow snow widut webs. The Irishman looked at him in open admiration. And on top av that, killin where wolf wid a knife, and choppin her pack loik so much kindlins. Green, ye may be, an ignorant. But, friend, ye've done a man's job this day, and I'm proud to know yes. Again he extended his hand and Bill seized it in a strong grip. Somehow, he did not resent being called green, and ignorant, he was learning the North. Fallon's me name the other continued, and be an accident av birth, I'm called Irish, for short. Mine is Bill, which is shorter replied Carmody, smiling. For just a second Irish hesitated as if expecting further enlightenment, but, receiving none, reached down and grasped the tail of the white wolf. "'Tis a fine robe she'll make, Bill, and in North, among white men and Injuns, 'twill give you place and standin', but not wid Muncrossin," he added with a frown. "Come on along. Follow yes in behint, frth thrale'll be fair broke. What wid two thrips wid rackets and drag avth wolf, 'twill not be bad. 'Tis only a mather av 20 minutes to for French'll beta be waiting wid horses. Chapter 16. Muncrossin. They found La Franz waiting in fear and trembling. The heavy snow plough was left in readiness for the morrow's trail breaking, and the horses hitched to a rough sled and headed for camp. "And ye say Mr. Appleton sent ye up to work in Muncrossin's camp?" The two were seated on the log bunk at the back of the sled while the Frenchman drove, keeping a fearful eye on the white wolf. For old man Frontenelle had been his uncle. "Yes, he told me to report here." "Do ye know Muncrossin?" "Well, ye will, agin Spring Irish replied dryly. "What do you mean?" asked Bill. "Irish SHNLGGED. "I mean this," he answered. "Muncrossin is a hard man altogether. He hates a greener. He thinks no one but an out hand has any business in woods, and 'tis his boast that in one season he'll make a lumberjack or a corpse out of any greener. And coming from Appleton his'll feel hate ye worse'n ever, for he'll think ye'll be after crimpin' his bird's eye game. Take advice, Bill, and kape on good side av ye can. He'll tiro into ye wid all manner av dirty thricks, but how'd ye retimper, and maybe ye'll winter out, and maybe ye won't." "What is a bird's eye game?" Fallon glanced at him sharply. "Do ye mean ye don't know about bird's eye?" he asked. "Not a thing," replied Bill. "Thin, listen to me. Don't ye neither say bird's eye in this camp av ye expect to winter out." Bill was anxious to hear more about the mysterious bird's eye, but the sled suddenly emerged into a wide clearing and Irish was pointing out the various buildings of the log camp. Bright squares of light showed from the windows of the bunkhouse, office, and grub shack, with its adjoining cook shack, from the iron stovepipe of which sparks shot skyward in a continuous shower. Fallon shouldered the wolf and, accompanied by Bill, made toward the bunkhouse, while the Frenchman turned the team toward the stable. "Agin we git washed up, sup'll be ready," announced Irish, as he deposited the wolf carcass beside the door and entered. Inside the long, low room, lined on either side by a double row of bunks, were gathered upward of 100 men waiting the supper call. They were big men, for the most part, rough-clad and unshaven. Many were seated upon the edges of the bunks smoking and talking, others grouped about the three big stoves, and the tobacco-reeking air was laden with the rumble of throaty conversation, broken here and there by the sharp scratch of a match, a loud laugh, or a deep-growled, good-natured curse. Into this assembly stepped Irish Fallon, closely followed by Bill, the sight of whose blood-stained face attracted grinning attention. The two men passed the length of the room to the wash bench, where a few loiterers still splashed noisily at their ablutions. "I heard it plain, I'm telling you," someone was saying. "Way off to the south it sounded." "That ain't no lie," broke in another, "I hearn it myself, just before dark, it was. And I know. Didn't I hear it that night over on Ten Fork? The time she got Jack Kane's woman, 4 year ago, come Christmas." "Yes, sir. I tell you the werewolf's nigh about this camp, and it's me in off the edges afore dark." "They say she never laughs but she makes a kill," said one. "God. I was at Skelly's when they brought old man Frontenelle in," added a big man, whose heavy beard was shot with grey, as he turned from the stove with a shudder. "They some Injuns trappin' below." She might have got one of them opined a short, stockily built man who, catching sight of the newcomers, addressed Fallon, "Hey, Irish, you was down on the Tote Road, did you hear Diables?" Fallon finished drying his face upon the coarse roller towel and tummed toward the group who waited expectantly. "Why is, Oi here rode her, all roight," he replied lightly. "And thin Oi seed her." Others crowded about, hanging upon his words. "And thin, be way av showin' me contempt," he added, "Oi drug her while or more rough th woods be thy tail." Loud laughter followed this assertion, but not a few, especially among the older men, shook their heads in open disapproval, and muttered curses at his levity. "But me friend Bill," here Irish continued, "see en tell ye more about her en what Oi kin. He's new in th woods, Bill is, and so damned green he no d neither th main nor use avth rackets. So, begad, he come widut mushed 2 whole days rough th snow. But, listen, no matter how ignorant, nor how much he don't know, a good man's a man, and to prove he jumps wid his axe roight into th middle avth werewolf's own and kills 9, countin' th 3 cripples Oi finished. But wid Diablish herself, mwand, he rode away his axe and goes to a clinch wid his knife in his fist. And when tea's over and he picks himself up out avth snow and wipes th blood from his eyes, her blood, he comes out avut widut scratch nor scar, Diablish lays at his feet dead as a nit." Fallon gazed triumphantly into the incredulous faces of the men, and, with a smile, added, "'Twas thin Oi drug her bth tail to thy sled, after her smash in her head with thy axe to make sure." "And where is she now, Irish?" mocked one. "Did she jump off the sled and make a getaway?" Over at the GNLB shack the cook's half-breed helper beat lustily upon the discarded saw blade that hung suspended by a wire, and the men crowded noisily out of the doors. "Show ye after her supper, ye damned spalpeen, how much av her got away," shouted Irish, who waited for Bill to remove the evidence of his fight before piloting him to the grub shack. A single table of rough lumber covered with brown oilcloth extended the full length of the center of the room. Above this table 6 huge Chicago burners lighted the interior, which, as the two men entered, was a hive of noisy activity. Men scuffled for places upon the stationary benches arranged along either side of the table. Heavy porcelain thumped the board, and the air was filled with the metallic din of steel knives and forks being gathered into bear-like hands. Up and down the wide alleys behind the benches hurried flunkies bearing huge tin pots of steaming coffee, and the incessant returning of thick cups to their saucers was like the rattle of musketry. But the thing that impressed the half-famished Bill was the profusion of food. Never in his life, he thought, had he beheld so tempting an array of things to eat. Great trenchers of fried pork, swimming in its own grease, alternated the full length of the table with huge pans of baked beans. Mountains of light, snowy bread rose at short intervals from among foothills of baked potatoes, steaming dishes of macaroni and stewed tomatoes, canned peas, and apple sauce, and great yellow rolls of butter into which the knives of the men skived deeply. The two passed behind the benches in search of vacant places when suddenly an undersized flunky stumbled awkwardly, dropping the coffee pot, which sent a wash of steaming brown liquid over the floor. Instantly a great, hulking man with a wide, flat face and low forehead surmounted by a thick thatch of black hair, below which two swinish eyes scintillated unevenly, paused in the act of raising a great cork-booted foot over the bench. The thick, pendulous lips under his ragged moustache curled backward, exposing a crenate row of jagged brown teeth. He stepped directly in front of the two men and, reaching out a thick hand, caught the unfortunate flunky by the scruff as he regained his balance. From his lips poured an unbroken stream of vile epithets and soul-searing curses while he shook the whimpering wretch with a violence that threatened serious results, and ended by pinning him against the log wall and drawing back his huge arm for a terrific shoulder blow. The vicious brutality of the attack following so trivial an offence aroused Bill Carmody's anger. The man's back was toward him, and Bill grasped the back-drawn arm at the wrist and with an ungentle jerk whirled the other in his tracks. The man released the flunky and faced him with a snarl. "Who done that?" he roared. "I did." "Hit me." "I tripped him." Bill's voice was dead level and low, but it carried to the far-fetched reaches of the room, over which had fallen a silence of expectation. Men saw that the hard grey eyes of the stranger narrowed ominously. "And who the hell are you?" The words whistled through the bared teeth and a flush of fury flooded the man's face. "What do you care?" "I tripped him." "Hit me," and the low, level tone blended into silence. It seemed a thing, that uncanny silence when noise should have been. There were sounds that no one heeded nor heard, the heavy breathing of 100 men waiting for something to happen, the thin creak of the table boards as men leaned forward upon hands whose knuckles whitened under the red skin, and stared, fascinated, at the two big men who faced each other in the broad aisle. The swinish eyes of the brutish man glared malignantly into the grey eyes of the stranger, in which there appeared no slightest flicker of rage nor hate, nor any other emotion. Only a cold, hard stare which held something of terrible intensity, accentuated by the little fans of whitening wrinkles which radiated from their corners. In that instant the other's gaze wavered. He knew that this man had lied, and he knew that every man in the room knew that he had lied. That he had deliberately lied into the row and then, without raising his guard, had dared him to strike. It was inconceivable. Had the man loudly shouted his challenge or thrown up his guard when he dared him to strike, or had his eye twitched or bummed with anger, he would have unhesitatingly lunged into a fight to the finish. But he found himself at a disadvantage. He was up against something he did not understand. The calm assurance of the stranger, his fists were not doubled and his lips smiled, disconcerted him. A strange, prickly chill tingled at the back of his neck, and in his heart he knew that for the first time in his life he dared not strike a man. He cast about craftily to save his face and took his cue from the other's smile. With an effort his loose, thick lips twisted into a grin. "Gee on with your joking, stranger," he laughed. "Why, you damn near made me mad for a minute," and he tummed to the table. Instantly a clatter of noise broke forth. Men rattled dishes nervously in relief or disappointment, and the room was filled with the rumble of voices in unmeaning chatter. But in the quick glances which passed from man to man there was much of meaning. "God, man, that was Mun Crossan," whispered Fallon, when the two found themselves seated near the end of the table. Bill smiled. "Was it?" he asked. "El don't like him." Chapter 17. A Two-Fisted Man. A half-hour later, when Bill sought out the boss in the little office, the latter received him in surly silence, and as he read Appleton's note his lip curled. "So you think you'll make a lumberjack, do you?" "Yes." There was no hesitation, nothing of doubt in the reply. My crew's full, the boss growled. Don't need no men, let alone a greener that don't know a peavy from a bark spud. What did the old man send you up here for, anyhow? That, I presume, is his business. Oh, it is it? Well, let me tell you first off, I'm boss of this here camp. Mun Crossan paused and glared at the younger man. You get that, do you? Just you remember that what I say goes, and I don't take no guffer for no man, not even one of the old man's pets, and that's my business, see? Bill smiled as the scowling man crushed the note in his hand and slammed it viciously into the woodbox. Wants you broke in, does he? All right, I'll break you. In spring you'll know a little something about logs, or you'll be so damn sick of the woods you'll run every time you hear a log chain rattle, and either way, you'll learn who's boss of this here camp. Mun Crossan sank his yellow teeth into a thick plug of tobacco and tore off the corner with a jerk. Throw your blankets into an empty bunk and be ready for work in the morning. I'll put you swampin' for the big Swede, I guess that to hold you. Your wages is $45 a month, and I'm right here to see that you earn 'em. Can I buy blankets here? I threw mine away coming out. Coming out? Coming in, you mean? Men come into the woods. In the spring they go out, if they're lucky. Get what you want over to the van, it'll be charged in your wages. Bill turned toward the door. By the way, the boss growled, what's your name, back where you come from? Bill. Bill what? No. Just Bill with a period for a full stop. And that's my business, see? As Mun Crossan encountered the level stare of the grey eyes he leered knowingly. 011, that's it, eh? All right, Bill. Curiosity killed the cat, as the fella says. And just don't forget to remember that what a man don't know don't hurt him none. Loggin' is learned in the choppins. Accidents happens, and dead men tells no tales. Them that keeps their eyes to the front and minds their own business genially winters through. That's all. Bill wondered at the seemingly irrelevant utterances of the boss, but left the office without comment. On the floor of the bunkhouse, Irish Fallon, assisted by several of the men, was removing the skin from Diabolus, while others looked on. The awkward hush that fell upon them as he entered told Bill that he had been the subject of their conversation. Men glanced at him covertly, as though taking his measure, and he soon found himself relating the adventures of the trail to an appreciative audience, which grinned approval and tendered flasks, which he declined. Later, as he helped Fallon nail the wolfskin to the end of the bunkhouse, he told him of the interview with Mun Crossan. The Irishman listened, frowning. Ye made a bad start with he said, shaking his head. Ye eyed him down in grub shack, and he hates ye for ut. How ye got by wid ut I don't know, for he's a SCR rapper from a way back, and he'd sailed into ye I'm thinking he'd knock Deville out ye, for he's had experience, which ye ain't. But he didn't dast to, and he knows ut, and he knows that the men knows ut. And now he'll lay for a chance to git Avon. Ut's thigh best ye see and do, loik he says, cape 2 eyes avu to front and land your own business, only cape one I behint ye to look out for throuble. What for job did he give yes? I am to start swamping, whatever that is, for the big Swede. The Irishman grinned. Oi that so, and may God have mercy on your soul. What is the matter with the Swede? Maitha enough. Being hand and glove with Mun Crossan is good reason to suspicion any man. For tis be the help av stromurg that Mun Crossan capes a loin on men and gets by wid his crooked work. He ain't long on brains nohow, Mun Crossan ain't, and he ain't a good camp boss neither, for all he gets out thigh logs. Be bluff and bullion he gets work out avth crew, but avut wasn't that Mr. Appleton lets pay a bit overgoing wages, He'd have no crew, for men hate for all they are afraid av earn. Reason he puts ye schwampen for big sweet is so's he'll cape an eye on yes. As long as ye do your work and land your own business ye'll get along with him as well as another. But, land ye, when birds eye star rts moving ye don't notice nothing or some foine evening ye'll turn up missing. What is this bird's eye thing? Asked Bill. What has it got to do with Mun Crossan, and me? The Irishman considered the question and, without answering, walked to the corner of the bunkhouse near which they were standing and peered into the black shadow of the wall. Apparently satisfied, he returned again to where Bill was standing. Come on in thy bunkhouse, now he said. I want to locate Stromberg and one or two more. We'll sit around and smoke a bit, and when they begin rolling in ye'll ask me for is thy van, for ye must have blankets and what not. I'll go along to show ye, and we'll take a turn down Tote Road where we see and talk wid it's gettin' to ears avth boss. Wondering at the man's precautions for secrecy, he followed, and for a half-hour listened to the fireside gossip of the camp. He noticed that Fallon's glance travelled over the various groups as if seeking someone, and he wondered which of the men was Stromberg. Suddenly the door was flung open and a huge, yellow-bearded man stamped noisily to the stove, disregarding the curses that issued from the bunks of those who had already turned in. This man was larger even than Mun Crossan, with protruding eyes of china blue, which stared weakly from beneath heavy, straw-coloured eyebrows. 250 pounds, thought Bill, as the man, snorting disagreeably, paused before him and fixed him with an insolent stare. Hey, you! Boss says you swamp for me, he snorted. Bill nodded indifferently. You know how to swamp good? He asked. Bill studied the toes of his moccasins and, without looking up, replied with a negative shake of his head. I learn you, all right. In couple days you swamp good, or I fix you. Bill looked up, encountered the watery glare of blue eyes, and returned his gaze to the points of his moccasins. The voice of the Swede grew more aggressive. He snorted importantly as the men looked on, and smote his palm with a ponderous fist. First thing, I duck you in waterhole. Then I slap you to peak and break off the peak. The men snickered, and Stromberg, emboldened by the silence of his new swamper, continued, It's time boys was in bed. Tomorrow I make you earn your wages. Bill rose slowly from his seat, and as he looked again into the face of the big Swede his lips smiled. But Fallon noticed, and others, that in the steely glint of the grey eyes was no hint of smile, and they watched curiously while he removed his mackinaw and tossed it carelessly onto the edge of a nearby bunk from where it slipped unnoticed to the floor. Stromberg produced a bottle, drank deep, and returned the flask to his pocket. He rasped the fire from his throat with a harsh, grating sound, drew the back of his hand across his mouth, and kicked contemptuously at the mackinaw which lay almost at his feet. As he did so a long, thick envelope, to which was tightly bound the photograph of a girl, slipped from the inner pocket. Instantly he stooped and seized it. Haw, haw, he roared, the greener's got a woman. Look, she's a, drop that. The voice was low, almost soft in tone, but the words cut quick and clear, with no hint of gentleness. Come get it, Greener. The man taunted as he doubled a huge fist, and held the photograph high that the others might see. Bill came. He covered the intervening space at a bound, springing swiftly and straight, as panthers spring, and as his moccasined feet touched the floor he struck. Once, twice, thrice, and all so quickly that the onlookers received no sense of repeated effort. The terrific force of the well-placed blows, and their deadly accuracy, seemed to be consecutive parts of a single, continuous, smoothly flowing movement. In the tense silence sounds rang sharp, the peculiar smack of living flesh hard hit, as the first blow landed just below the ear, the dull thump of a heavy body blow, and the clash of teeth driven against teeth as the sagging jaw of the big Swede snapped shut to the impact of the long swing that landed full on his chin's point. The huge form stiffened, spun halfway around, and toppled sidewise against a rack of dealing garments, which fell with a crash to the floor. Without so much as a glance at the ludicrously sprawled figure, Bill picked up his Mackinaw and returned the envelope to the pocket. "Irish," he asked, "where is the van? I must get some blankets. My nurse, there, says it's time to turn in." "Go wid you," said Fallon, and a roar of laughter followed them out into the night. Chapter 18. Bird's Eye and Philosophy. Bill quickly made his purchases, and shouldering the roll of blankets, followed Irish to the head of a rollway, where the two seated themselves on the bunk of a log sled. "Oi don't know how ye done ut," Fallon began. "'Twas handiest bit av two-fisted were rkiv a seed. T's well ye had ut outwid Stromberg. For all his crookedness, he's a better man than boss, and he'll not be laying that lickin' up agin yes. 'Twas a foit av his own picking, and he knows ye got him faded. Aven av he w'd of before, he'll see to ut that no harm comes to ye now. Rough fault av his own, for well he knows the men you'd think 'twas done to pay ye back, and he'll have no wish to play title role at Hagen. From now on, 'tis only Mun Crossin' ye'll have to watch, for ye're in good wid men. We understand ye now. Ye see, in woods we don't loik mysteryin, whiles we most av us know that Mun Crossin's giving Appleton thy double cross, 'tis none av our business, and fwin without ye de come into woods under false pretenses to catch at ut, they was more or less talk. Meself was beginnin' to think ye de come into woods for wrist cure, ye read about in papers, seeing ye de loafed about for maybe it's 5 hours and done nothing besides carve up where wolf and her pack, I downth boss in his own grub shack, and thin top off avenin be knockin' thigh big Swede cold, which some claims he see'd put thigh boss himself to brush, vunst he got started. But now we know fi ye re here. We're proud ye re one av us." "What do you mean? You know why I am here." "I am here because I needed a job, and Appleton hired me." "Sure, lad. But, ye'm land picture in your pocket." "'Twas a woman." "But, 'tis none av our business, and 'tis neither here nor there. Av there's a woman at bottom avut, 'tis raisin enough, whatever happens." Bill laughed. "You were going to tell me about the bird's eye," he reminded. "Ut's like this, here and yon in timber there's a bird's eye tree, bird's eye maple, ye know. 'Tis scarce enough, we'd only a tree now and again, and ut takes an expert to spot ut. Well, thy bird's eye brings around $100 a thousand, and devil a bit avut gets to Appleton's mills. Mun Crossin's got a gang, Stromberg's in ut, and a French gliser named Lebold, and a bootleggin' tree spotter named Creed, that lives in Hilarity, and a couple av worthless devils av sawyers that's too lazy for honest work, but camps rough winter, trappin' and sawin' bird's eye and calico ash on other men's land. Stromberg'll skid till along towards spring when he'll go to teemin'. Be that bird's eye logs'll be down, here and there in woods bay and choppins, and Stromberg'll haul and bank on some river, thin in summer, Mun Crossin' and his men'll slip up, toggle to light logs so they'll float, and raft to thigh railroad for there'll be a buyer from eastern Vana Mills waiting. Ut's a crooked game, stealing Appleton's logs, and haulin' wid Appleton's teams, and drawin' Appleton's wages for doing ut. Now, Bakun man and man, big Swedes brains avth gang. He's a whole lot smarter in what he lets on. Such ain't nature av men, but tis way av women. Irish thoughtfully tamped his pipe bowl, and the flare of the match between his cupped palms brought out his honest features distinctly in the darkness. Bill felt a strong liking for this homely philosopher, and he listened as the other eyed him knowingly and continued, "Ts be experience with rn. And th sooner a man rns, th beta ut is for that all women know more than they let on, and they've always an ace for a whole car road becase avut. For women run men, and men politics, and politics armies, and armies thy were rld, and at thy bottom avut all is th wisdom and scheme and av women. When a man fools a woman, he's a fool, for she ain't fooled at all. But, she ain't fool enough to let on she ain't fooled, for well she knows that as long as she knows more than he thinks she knows, she holds th edge, and th devil avut is, she does. Take a man, now, when ye know he's always willin' to admit he's as schmarty as he is, or a damn soit schmarter, which don't fool no one, for 'tis what they expect. A man brag and lie about what he knows, and where he's been, and what he's done, and noin twams out avtin, ye cud trust him to th ins avth earth wid ye relash dollar. But once let go out av his way to belittle himself and what he knows, and oi wouldn't trust him wid a bent penny as far as oi cud row a bull be th tail fur t's done wid a purpose. T's so wid stromurg. Fallon arose, consulted his watch, and led the way toward the bunkhouse. So now ye know fur phwy Muncrossin hates ye, he continued. He knows ye re a greener in th woods, but he knows be this twam ye'll be a hard road man to handle, and he fears ye. Oi ve put ye wise to th bird's eye game so ye cn steer clear of that, and not be gettin mixed up in ut one way or another. I am much obliged, Fallon, for what you have told me, replied Bill quietly, but inasmuch as I am working for Appleton, I will just make it my business to look after his interests in whatever way possible. I guess I will take a hand in the bird's eye game myself. I am not afraid of Muncrossin and his gang of thieves. Anyway, I will give them a run for their money. Fallon shrugged. Do ye know, oi thought ye de say that. Well, 'tis ye re own funeral. Telling ye about me, oi ain't lost no bird's eye trees, meself, but av ye need help, be th way, th bunk above mine's empty, ye mwah row ye re blankets in there.